everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's Seminole County Board of County Commissioners meeting. Today is June 13th. I'd like to call our meeting to order and invite to lead us in the invocation Pastor Jim Lynch from the East Coast Believers Church.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Please bow your heads with me this morning. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we can come before you this day. And I thank you for all who are gathered here, and I pray that you would continue to pour down your blessings and your presence on their lives and the lives of their families. I thank you for the dedication of these men and women to serve the needs of the people and community in Seminole County. And I pray that you, Lord, would give them the strength and wisdom to endure the hard times and decisions that they face every day, knowing that with you all things are possible. As we put our trust in you, Lord, let us see unity like we have never seen before and blessings like we have never imagined. Bless everyone that this Board of Commissioners put their hands to, and remind all of us that with you there are no limits to what we can accomplish together. And I thank you, Father, for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to thank all of you again for being here this morning. We have two work sessions and a presentation this morning before we move to our consent agenda. But we are going to reorder them. We're going to do Seminole Forever first, and then the Wekiva Basin Study presentation, followed by the Library Master Plan. Mr. Durr.
Good morning. For the record, Rick Durr, Leisure Services Director for Seminole County. Where we're going to start the presentation is the last time we were with you. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the March 14th work session that we'd had, which really discussed the review of past acquisition efforts in the county, going all the way back to our first bond referendum, a update on where we are in terms of funding of those programs. And then lastly, we went through the draft Seminole Forever proposed ordinance. So just again, as just a recap, we talked about the last of the dollars in the Natural Lands Bond Program has been accounted for. We have heard through past planning efforts that there are additional needs for parks and open space, both in the urbanized area, there you go, the tongue cooperated, and the county's population. And then last but not least, we talked about that we were launching into a new refresh of the Parks and Natural Lands System Master Plan. The last time that we did that was 2013, so we're due is what it comes up for. And then we went through each of the sections in the ordinance. So today, rather than go through line by line, there's a couple of things that we can update you on. Number one is we've started the Park System Master Plan. We've got a couple of public open houses coming up as part of the data collection and gathering of that particular project. And we'll be back before you on that, right now scheduled for around September, October. There we go. The other thing that's happened since the last time we were here was the Florida Forever application for the Yarborough property. This, while we are in the process of revising the Seminole Forever, really helped us to work through the mechanisms. It's one thing to see some guidance on paper. It's another thing to work directly with the program manager in Tallahassee who walks you through that process, and we can start to see how this functions organizationally as well. So what we provided are a number of documents. First is the original, the last version, if you will, of the ordinance that we went through with you. We gave you a new red line version so you can put those two documents side by side and see exactly what's been updated. And then lastly, we're calling this the play-by-play. This is more of a working document that allowed us to take all the questions and comments that was before at the last meeting, and go ahead and make sure that either if there was a question or comment that was for additional information, that we provided that, as well as here's what was done within the document to update that language, and here's where it may have affected other language in the piece. So general approach overall, and again, I'm not going to go through every single change that's in there, but they kind of fell into 5 themes, if you will. The first one was there was a lot of questions and looking for input on the definition of terms. There was some concern that if, based on how this was worded, that active recreation could somehow sneak into this. We wanted to make sure that that is not the intention of this ordinance. So anywhere in the document where that might have been raised, that concern might have been raised, we made sure we went ahead and revised that. That there was a lot of concern and questions regarding the roles of the ARC and the county staff, such as leisure services. That has been revised and updated throughout the document. Where as needed, we've consulted the different Florida Forever program definitions to help us out along the way. No need to reinvent the wheel every time we go through this ordinance. Number 4, when there was a question about metrics, percentages, operations and maintenance, other things like that, we looked at how not just what's written in the Florida Forever program and is memorialized in that document, but how operationally that worked as we worked through the Yarborough application. And then lastly, every time we would tug on a thread, we wanted to make sure that we hadn't undone something else in the document. Also, we wanted to make sure that as we continue to clean up the language that's in there, that it's all consistent. Now, even since we've gone ahead and provided you this, we found a couple of other items as well. I think 1,000 Friends of Florida is still spelled out. It's not the 1000. And a couple of other sections where we're trying to provide some language. We needed to make sure that legally that's what it could say within the ordinance. So, with that in mind, some general overviews of the individual sections. We added some clarifying language right up front. And again, there was discussion at the last meeting about what passive parks really were. Wanted to make sure we didn't forget about farmlands, community gardens, and so forth. But really pushing that towards a resource-based passive recreation definition that's more consistent with how we do our natural lands program, for example. That brings us to the definition section, and I've just highlighted a number of updates that were done. Probably go all the way down to the bottom line on the screen, line 84. Again, the idea of being less generic with the definitions of recreation lands and making sure we're clear on what actually is and is not in this ordinance. Lots of comments and direction on the use of the advisory board. So again, really getting a close look on how this operates at the state level and understanding how the interaction was between the ARC and not just state staff, but also applicants. We're able to go ahead and update some of these items. Down under Part C, which is about the last third of the slide, the idea that we're now mirroring pretty much precisely what the Florida Forever ARC looks like, as well as how they function. Well, line item 106, which is, again, a little bit closer to the bottom of the slide, the idea that when you're appointing folks within the community to sit on the ARC, not only do we need the movers and the shakers of those that really understand the subject matter, but that we're also looking for advocates who are subject matter experts, so that we get a good cross-section of folks within the community and give you the best and most flexibility to go ahead and appoint those folks in the community who are experts at this. To be continued, the creation of, and I'm going to read this one word for word, the creation of the ARC more closely mirrors the Florida Forever program. So that was the definition of the ARC. The old 204 talked about partnerships, and as we continue to make revisions throughout the document, this actually, the thrust of this particular part of the old ordinance was really spread out among a number of other ones. So we eliminated the old 204 and moved the changes to other parts within the document. So the new 204, once again, clarifying the organizational functioning between leisure services and the ARC, and as well as refining that in section 205. Section 206 gets to the dollars. There are some major changes that were made throughout this part, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this as we move forward. There were, as you remember, different ideas or differences of opinion, between what we are requiring and what we are showing in the document. So in this case, we've gone back and added some language that says the 5% does not just have to be from the general fund. It can be a combination of other funds from other tools that are in our toolbox. So it's really the aggregate that we're looking for. We're looking to fund it at a level in which you're happy with it as well. We left the language regarding TDT for the only reason that says that is an item in the toolbox. That does not mean it has to be used. But we wanted to make sure that you had enough flexibility in the funding of the program that we kept those tools in there, again, just based on what will be available for you. So this little note that we've included basically says we're really looking to find the full toolbox of options. The other thing that we've added is there may be, we don't know, 5 years in the future, another funding tool that we don't mention here. So it was very carefully written to say this is not just the limits of this particular list. Line 174 talked about the allocation of a 10% purchase price to the property's capital improvement. One of the things that we went through with the Yarborough application was really understanding how the state moved forward the idea or the notion that we needed some dollars added into the overall analysis of a property. And really what they've described and what we ended up writing was what's called, in quotes, a management prospectus. The management prospectus said this is our best guess at this particular time, and the requirement was for staff to be able to fill out 2 years' worth of potential funding, just to really get us in the door. If you think about it, we did a similar type of thing when we were looking at the Deer Run and Wekiva golf course purchases, same deal. It's great that we know what the purchase price is going to be. How do we get some insight into what the operations and maintenance of that may be going forward? And that at least gets us moving, and it's built into the technical review process of the application. So again, very similar to what we saw at Florida Forever, and we were able to pull that as a potential to add to Seminole Forever. So line 184 is where we started listing all of those alternate funding sources. And again, none of these are county programs, which is why TDT is listed separately. These particular funding mechanisms or tools are state or federal programs that we can certainly add in. And again, the idea that this is not the only list, that this may include but not limited to the following. So again, if another program comes along down the line sometime in the next several years, we'll make sure that we have the ability to take advantage of that as well. And then we made sure that we emphasize the idea that we would continue to seek volunteers to support the program throughout the life of the program. Property eligible for acquisition management, the new section 208 added some clarifying language. We put in a specific definition about joint acquisition process. What did that mean? And that allows us to go ahead and function to fund with other parties. We got into discussion at the last meeting about this particular part of the ordinance. This allows for whether it's a private citizen or a city to get involved with partially funding the project and sharing the costs with the county. Section 209 got into the criteria for evaluation for the evaluation of applications. In this case, we went back to what we discussed at the last meeting about our natural lands program and provided an outline based upon what we've used in the past. We've compared and contrasted that with what Florida Forever is looking at, and in that case, it's pretty broad. In this case, we've got some things that we have basically on the books that we've continued to use as properties became available for acquisition. And that the idea is to provide a baseline set of criteria or a framework for the ARC. That the ARC would then work on this is really their first assignment. What kind of emphasis and what kind of grading system do you give towards the application? And then their first goal of sitting as an ARC would then to bring that criteria back to you, review it, and have you bless it with any changes that need to be made. And that this would be the criteria that would be used going ahead and going forward with the program as we went through funding. Talked about the increased priority for acquisition in section 210. We added in some definitions to make sure that when we talked about T&E species, threatened or endangered species, that we're using the very purest of the pure of the definitions, reflecting back to Florida Fish and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and so forth. And then lastly, on Section 225, we've added the notion that you could have an increased priority for acquisition by talking about, is the property within the floodplain, wetland protection, water quality, water quantity issues, that those are all factors that could lead towards the increased priority for acquisition. Again, the idea that this is the first assignment that the ARC would have once they're seated. Section 211 is about creating a 5-year acquisition plan. There was some qualifying language that we put in there to understand that this is coming directly from the ARC committee, that we're going to provide input and help and assistance, but it's really the ARC's job to bring that back to you. And that Section 212 in the land selection process, again, trying to mirror that of Florida Forever and taking the best of that program and making sure that we've got that enumerated within our ordinance. The last 3 sections saw very little in terms of revisions. This became one that we added in at the first on Section 213, just making sure that we were pointing back to another section for clarity once we went ahead and went into that. So this is a great example of where we pulled on one string and we needed to make sure that other string was accounted for, that was pulled in the ordinance. So with that overview, and you have the revised ordinance in front of you. Obviously, we'd like to open that up to any questions, discussions. I'd like to recognize, who's in the house here? Looking around the room, they're seated very far away, hoping they don't get called on. But this was by no means, and again, as we've done in the past on many occasions, this was very much a group effort. We had our natural lands folks involved, special program manager for leisure services, obviously the county manager's office, the county attorney's office, with Gerlin providing a lot of revisions and updates to the ordinance and reviewing it as we go forward. So again, thanks to all of you, because there's no way we could have been able to do this and get this back to you with the kind of amount of revision that's been made and updates that have been made. And really where we want to end up with is a version of this that once we have all your comments, to be able to bring back to you at a future date to have this adopted as an ordinance. So that's really the takeaway from today. So with that being said, that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Durr. Commissioner Herr asked to be recognized.
Yeah, so first let me start by saying thank you. Number one, I love the play-by-play. So that approach, I don't know if that started with you or where that, but that was awesome, just so that we can go back and retrack back to what we've asked for, and is it in here, the amount of time that saves, and the consistency that will bring to our processes is a huge improvement. So thank you for that. I'm going to take you to something that you didn't have on the slide, and that is the draft Seminole Forever criteria, in addition to the draft Seminole Forever land selection key. And in both of those, I think that you need to add, under natural lands and passive parks on the criteria, an additional number, and you need to address water right there. Because it's not mentioned up front, and that's sort of maybe the part of this that people will read and the other part of it people won't read. And that's as important to us as the land, is that if it has a positive impact on the aquifer or wetlands, et cetera, and you guys define that, but it needs to be stated right up front that that's very important to us. And then my next commentary is back on, it's slide 13. And I just want to make sure that we understand this. This is line 174. You mentioned that it was 2 years of funding that would be in the management prospectus. I could be wrong, but I think what we were looking for is the ongoing maintenance as well. And so is that addressed somewhere else very clearly? And quite honestly, I think it needs to be in here as well.
And you're right on with that comment. The idea of when we would evaluate a particular application and have that 2-year prospectus, should that property be acquired, it would then move to we would then negotiate the purchase price, make the purchase, and at the same time we would be part of the acquisition process, would be doing an actual management plan. So the idea that once it's past the first hurdle, and that's where we are, for example, with the Yarborough property. Once we've at least taken a look at the application, and then we go through the second hurdle that says, how does this qualify and where does it rank on our list? We would then need to do a full-blown management plan. It is implied as part of being part of a management plan, but what I'm hearing is we need to make sure we're direct about it. So we can add that language.
So, go for it.
I'll just add, yes, I'll just add one thing, and actually Rick is right, but I know where you're going as well. And so one of the things, and actually we're going to be talking about it next week at our budget work sessions, when this program, if it moves forward, when the ARC recommends something to you, not only are you going to have what the purchase price is, but what Rick is right, we are going to have a operation and maintenance cost of it as well, so you can see the big picture. So we know where you're going, so if maybe we can identify it somewhere in the ordinance that is actually coming to you simultaneously as well as what the property is coming to you and what the purchase price is, so we don't miss out on what that piece is.
Right, and so I heard two different things. One was, I'm going to be given the management operating cost after we make a decision to acquire the property, and I want it as we are making it. I want to make a decision including the ongoing
Absolutely.
costs so that we're not guessing.
It will go with the latter.
There you go. And then the next page, and I promise these are my last comments. So this would be line 184, this is 190.207, and this is the additional alternative. And so alternative doesn't sound like additional. Alternative is an alternative to the 5%.
I hear you.
And I think we just want to be clear that this is not replacing our commitment, that these are funds that would be in addition to.
Correct.
And there was reference to 6% in your presentation, but I think it was crossed out in the ordinance and it says 5.
5, that's correct.
Yep. That's it. Thank you.
Commissioner Zembauer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First, I want to thank staff for the great deal of work that you've done. I know you spent a lot of time in research and digging into this. I appreciate you all taking my suggestions on the farming and ag side as well as the community gardens. And I also appreciate you identifying who and specifically threatened species and how that will be followed. So I think that's important. One thing I didn't see in this, and I think it's going to vary from parcel to parcel, obviously, is fishing and hunting as a passive recreation. I don't see anything in here. The state-owned lands accommodates that, of course. What is your thought process on that?
So on the fishing side of things, I think we're good in terms of not just this particular ordinance, but other ordinances that we have on our existing natural lands properties. Where we would have a conflict potentially is that the way that the ordinance is written for our natural lands program is that hunting is not allowed. We would need to work with legal to find out whether or not that would either come in conflict, or if it's something that we can add in here, and because it is a separate program, again, I'm speaking instead of Paul, but I should probably just hand it over to him, but that would be the conversation I would have with our legal representation to say, what can we do here, what can we not do here, and what's the implication going forward?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to do with the size of the parcel, obviously. You're not going to be hunting in an urban setting unless it's maybe an archery setting. But the importance to this is we have to understand hunters and fishermen are taxpayers as well. And I will also tell you that they are some of the best conservationists in this country. Last year alone, they provided almost $1.5 billion in tax revenue to the Department of Interior through the Pittman Robertson Act. The state of Florida received about $21 million of that prop share, which we would be allowed to leverage as well through this program, in addition to the programs that you have already listed. So I'd like some clarification on that. You know, as we go on, one of the reasons not only to increase the quality of water, more green spaces, open spaces, more enjoyment for our citizens, is the young children today are often don't have a place to go fish, don't have a place to hunt. Many hunters in this state now are actually forced to go to Georgia, Alabama, the Carolinas, because the property is just evaporated. On the state game lands, there's certain times that hunting is open, and it's well posted, that hunters are going to be in there, and of course, the equestrians and the, other folks are put on notice. So I'd like to have some clarity on that, if you would. If you can get with legal. Thank you.
Will do.
Commissioner, if I could just ask the question, as a matter of policy, before we start going down the hunting route and giving you a full analysis on whether it could be permitted, historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, on county property, hunting has not been permitted, so that's been a policy of the board.
Sure.
Again, is it the desire of this board to look to change that policy at this point in time?
Commissioner Hurd?
I'm a no.
Commissioner Delary?
As long as it's at Publix, I'm okay with it.
As long as it's at Publix.
Right, it comes wrapped in the white little trays.
Styrofoam.
Cleaned.
Yep. Commissioner Constantine?
I'd like to see where there are other areas in Seminole County that there might be hunting available. But I think that the reason that we have done this in the past is because we just didn't have large pieces of property to do that.
Right.
I don't foresee any of us or us being able to purchase a large piece of property in Seminole County to do this. But, if it comes up, and there is, I think we should at least take a look at it then. But right now, in the sense that what we have, I don't think that I would support it.
I'm a no.
With that, I will look at it and bring it back.
Yeah.
since-
I mean, I'd be
since there's no
curious to hear the
specific-
answer, but at this point, I'm not interested in changing our current policy. I'm all for hunting. Love some good
It's
deer
all
meat.
right. When the world comes to an end,
Just
I'll
a-
make sure y'all are fed.
That's fine. I got squirrels in my trees and a BB gun.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, exactly.
We have heard about your
Commissioner-
squirrels.
Commissioner Zembauer, anything else that you'd like to bring up? 'Cause
No, I'm
Commissioner
good.
Delary wanted to be recognized
you.
next. All
Thank
right.
you, thank you, Madam Chairman. Rick, I think you did a phenomenal job. I think your staff's done a phenomenal job, as well as the legal department. I think everyone associated with this has done a really good job. I think it's in a good place, in a good position. It's very clear. It identifies all the hard work that's done in the past and all the work that's done presently, and it's a clear direction moving forward. But I'd be remiss if I did not ask Jim Doobie to come to the podium. And the reason I'm asking Jim Doobie to come to the podium, because he's been involved in our natural lands. How many years now, Jim?
A little over 30, 27-ish with the natural lands.
The reason I want to thank you for your hard work, and I know this is not your last meeting, but this is your last month, because I know you're retiring at the end of this month. And I want to thank you for your hard work and all your dedication to the natural lands program throughout the entire county and the surrounding counties.
Thank you very much.
I also want to, and I've warned many people that when they do come to your office, if there's a pillowcase under your desk, there's always some type of a snake inside that pillowcase. Just FYI.
I've heard that.
True.
And I would also tell you that when my assistant executive, Kendra, went to your office, you actually put one of those big snakes around her, and she almost freaked out. And don't do that again, please. But I want to thank you for your hard work. I didn't know if you had any input or insight you wanted to share with us moving forward.
I've been very involved all along. I think it's a good thing. The state program is certainly a very successful program. And I think as we move into kind of a different phase, you see we're including more than just the natural lands with the farmlands and community gardens, maybe some, I call them community or urban nature parks. I think it needs to be kind of tweaked and take a little bit different avenue towards it.
I want to thank you for your hard work and for the past X amount of years you've been with, not just with the county, but in Central Florida.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
And the member
Doobie,
comes.
yeah, while you're up there,
He's not leaving yet.
yeah, for now, I would love to hear what those tweaks are, because I think that some further clarification would be fabulous. Doesn't need to be now, but I would like to better understand what you think could enhance the urban open space areas. What did you call them? Urban
nature parks is.
Urban
that's just a
nature
completely,
parks.
yeah.
And your thoughts on the farmland as well. So at some point in time.
Okay.
Commissioner Constantine?
I think that what Mr. Doobie is talking about, if I'm not mistaken, is looking at it like we do with Florida Communities Trust, where they buy land in the urban areas and then make it an urban park. And that, I think that it's accommodating in here. I don't think that he would disagree with that. I think that he just wants a twist on it potentially.
Yeah,
And-
I just want to hear the twist.
Yeah, mhm.
Thank you.
And certainly all those would be managed a little differently.
Yep.
And we have spent quite a bit of time thinking about that, is because of the urban area, whether it's a community garden, there's probably going to be different criteria. And I really think, as we did with the first program, that the ARC committee, which was, we had the Natural Lands Advisory Committee, they're the ones to sit down, a different perspective than maybe somebody like me that's got this, sorry, Rick.
That's
lost your place. This natural lands focus for all these years. It would be good to bring some other viewpoints in.
Thank you. I'll look forward to the chat.
Madam Chair, I have one last comment
Yes,
for
Commissioner
Mr. Rick Durr.
Jim doesn't realize he's not leaving yet. But, this big secret.
I'm actually happy that you said that. When we talked about the committee, the ARC committee, we talked about subject matter experts. I'd like to have somewhere a list of what those subject matter experts could be, so that we actually try to identify those types of individuals. I want to make sure that it's truly diverse. I want to make sure that we have a wide variety of individuals, not just experts, so that we can get a good cross-reference of individuals. I think that would be, because just saying subject matter experts, it's very broad.
Certainly.
So,
And we can certainly provide that information.
yeah, thank you. End of my comments, Madam Chairman.
Great. I would love to just add, in addition to that diversity umbrella, someone from the community with a perspective on disabilities.
But that to me is diversity.
Yeah, I know, but, I'm just throwing out there, like, they may not be necessarily parks, open space, natural lands people, but they're closely aligned with the disability community. Okay. Commissioner Constantine?
Commissioner, I think I've had a lot of input on this. I do reserve the right to, talk afterwards, but I'd love to hear it from the citizens.
Well, we're going to take public comment after this morning, after the work session and presentations.
Okay.
So my only input is farmland is great, but farming is not passive. And depending on the type of farming that an individual is participating in, it can be very impactful in terms of use of pesticides and fertilizers. And I'd like to look at perhaps putting some qualifiers on it being low-impact farming or using organic principles, something so that we're soil building rather than just general farming. That's my 2 cents on that.
Understood. And just as an FYI as well, and we've encountered this locally, you have the state forest, and they have a logging program. You don't normally think of that as together and as part of the management plan, but that's exactly what they have here at the state forest.
Right, that's wonderful. All right, any other comments on this topic? Anything from the county manager?
No, I just want to thank Rick and his staff as well. He was a little nice to his staff meeting, giving them a lot of credit. They should deserve a lot more credit, because not only are they doing this and then running our whole park system, as you know, but the Yarborough application, that was a huge lift, and this afternoon I will give the board an update on that. But what him and his staff has done to take that from where it was when I first got here 90 days ago to where it is now is phenomenal, and where it is in the state process. So we'll get to that, but I just want to publicly thank Rick and his staff and the Attorney's Office for really leading that effort.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Durr. All right, the Wekiva River Basin Study.
Commissioner?
Yes?
If I might, I think that there are people that are here just to speak on Florida Forever. Could we just do that as separately as opposed to then going on to the next one and then the next one?
No, we're going to take public comment on the work session and presentation items when we're done with the work sessions.
Then, if that's the case, I do want to talk about Florida, Seminole Forever, if I could, because I thought we were going to go through the individuals, and if I can just say.
Well, Commissioner Constantine, yes, you may, but let me just be really clear, especially to the public. We have had multiple work sessions about this. These are work sessions for the board to give feedback to the manager and to our team. These are not public, they're not consent agenda items, they're not regular agenda items, they're not public hearing items. There will come a time when this will come before the board and we can continue to receive public input. I think the board has heard from all of the folks who are here many times on this topic. We certainly have received lots of emails where I think we're all very clear on where the public stands on this and certainly with your help in getting them all to be here this morning, I know they want to speak and we will do that. But if you'd like to talk about the topic after we've moved on to the next one, that's fine.
Well, thank you very much. Then I just want to say I also want to thank the staff. The guidelines that I presented almost a year ago, I think have been fairly well followed and worked on. And they have given, like all of us, a great deal of input into the writing and the wording of this particular ordinance. I do want to say how proud I am that if we do this, we will be the first in the state not to understand that conservation lands is vitally important to the community, and we are not asking our citizens to tax themselves more to do it, but we are literally embedding it into our general revenue budget, into an ongoing dedicated funding source with, again, no new taxes. This will be the first in the state that has done this. And I think as we have proposed this, I have seen a number of counties ask for, and not only in my position as President of Florida Association of Counties, but just from the standpoint of the publicity that it has received, have asked for the outline so that they can look at this and, again, not have to go to a referendum necessarily to establish this. We have been very consistent with the Florida Forever program, which has been, when funded, an incredible success story, one that is lauded throughout the United States as the preeminent conservation program in the nation from the state perspective. And we have set up an ARC group that will have a great deal of responsibility to set the criteria, which included, tweaks in this particular thing as they see priorities, and that it is also established so that it is not used by individuals who want to hijack the system and make us buy their property because they might develop on it. It puts in a 5-year plan, which, quite frankly, is extremely important, something very similar to what the DOT does and has been successful over the years, and that you put together a 5-year plan, you continually change those priorities, but at the same time, you establish, a system where you are buying only the most important properties. And then in the funding category, we have put in all the tools in the toolbox, including things like tax increment financing and fee simple, conservation protection, all of those different tools so that we can get the best bang for our buck. It has been written by so many different people. that a strong ecosystem requires 40 to 50% of lands to be preserved, and we are at approximately 30, so we are taking the vital steps to ensure that our citizens will have the quality of life that they have come to deserve and love. The only concern I have, and I've expressed this to the county manager, and I want to put it in public, is that I refer back to Mr. Baer's letter that he sent out, is that, you know, when they were brought forward to this from a perspective of a referendum, they were asking for what would approximately be around $5 million a year. The 5% does not get us there. The 6% was closer. I would like the county manager to continue to look at sources of revenue for that, and that would be my only concern about this. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the fact that we are doing also that it has to have a supermajority for any change. And so with all of that said, I obviously, like I think the rest of you, am very excited and supportive of this particular ordinance.
Thank you. Mr. Dresch.
Good morning. For the record, John Church, Public Works Director, County Engineer. The Wekiva Watershed Management Plan is for 3 basins, Little Wekiva, Big Wekiva, and the Yankee Lake. On February 14, we had the initial work session, and here in that room today, it is the second work session. It will be presented by Mark Aller with the Geosyntac Engineering. After he presents the report, I'll come back to discuss the direction of the board direction and the recommendation of the staff.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Commission, for having me back to continue and really complete the story for the Wekiva watershed. Again, I'm Mark Ellard, Senior Principal with Geosyntac Consultants and the project manager for this project. Now, here's an outline of what we're going to talk about, a little bit of project history today. We have talked about this, a lot of it, before, so I'm going to scoot through fairly quickly some of the background and get to the things that are different, that are new here. So a little project history today, talk about what we've gone through and the items we looked at are just existing condition summary. We're going to talk about floodplains, some specifics about that, which are important for the recommendations. Really, some of the things that are new is last time we identified a list of projects that we were going to do some further conceptualization, put some, pencil to paper, cost out, and we have done that now, so we'll present that information, which will end in a list of priority proposed improvement projects in addition to the wealth of information that the basin study provided. So quick history, as John alluded to, we commenced back in January 2022 with this phase. Had public meetings along the way, both last year in May and then recently in this year in March to get input from the public. Had, of course, the initial workshop back in February 14th that was mentioned. Talked about a lot of the background, initial data to date. We have this meeting today, and then we have submitted last month a draft final report encapsulating all the information, and subject to your input today and final input from county staff. We'll be finalizing that after this meeting. So to orient, again, for those, and particularly maybe for those that are watching, when we talk about the Wekiva watershed, we're talking about what has classically been defined as three westernmost basins in Seminole County: Little Wekiva Basin, Big Wekiva Basin, and Yankee Lake Basin. So it's essentially all the areas that drain directly to the Wekiva River. That's about a total of 56 square miles. Now, our scope of work in this, real quick, gathering a lot of data, really characterizing everything we need to know. New data, because it's been a long while since it was studied previously. Using that as a support to do an existing conditions analysis. Everything really to do with flooding, with characterizing the performance of drainage infrastructure. One different thing about the Wekiva relative to some of the other basin studies that are involved with is there's a bigger focus on water quality in this watershed. So that was looked at in particular. All these things are leading to improvement measures. What can we do to make the Wekiwa watershed better? And so that's a list of projects and ideas and things to do to move forward with after this plan. So again, reports that we'll be finalizing as we get past this, your input, and incorporate that in the project. So when we talk about the existing conditions and using that data, we're three main things: evaluating the level of service of infrastructure, drainage infrastructure, focused in county unincorporated areas. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The floodplain assessment, and there's going to be some important statistics and numbers to talk about how the floodplains are predicted to change if we leverage this information that we've developed during this study. And then the water quality assessment. So I'm going to jump right into that, because again, a bit of this is a review. When we talk about focusing on the unincorporated primary infrastructure, we're talking about looking at assessing the roadways, drainage, culverts, stormwater ponds, channels. We developed a letter grading system to evaluate their performance relative to design criteria. Really simple, A, B, C, D. We developed maps like this that show really clear, D in red, A in green. So there's some areas that appear to be fine. This is done on a sub-basin or catchment basis. So what this really does is point us to, based on our calculations, these are some areas we can start to focus in on and look for the need for improvements, and then be able to start identifying what those improvements may be. Similarly, on a water quality standpoint, we do something similar. We do a pollutant load assessment. This is really looking for what the pollutant loads are that are being generated by these same catchment or sub-basin areas. The primary constituents we're concerned when we talk about pollutants are nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen. So we key in on this. For example, this map shows nitrogen. Again, one of these maps where we can color code and start to look at particular areas we can start to zero in and look for good candidates for water quality improvement measures. Floodplains is very, very important. As you may recall, the FEMA floodplains date back to 2007, which doesn't sound that long ago, but it's very, very long ago. And since that time, there's been a lot of development, particularly in the northern parts of the watershed. But there's also been the ability through technology and computer modeling and even good data to be able to assess things in a more detailed manner. So this is an opportunity to leverage that new data and do a better updated job defining floodplains. So this map shows the current FEMA floodplains throughout these collective watersheds, focused on a lot of the lakes, the rivers, and everything, but certainly outdated at this point. Now, this is a map that shows the results of our updated floodplain modeling, again, leveraging new state-provided LiDAR topographical data, very detailed. We got survey data during this process. The detailed modeling reflected new developments that came in, and including the Wekiwa Parkway was a large feature, of course, in the northern part of the basin. Reevaluated and determined estimated new 100-year or 1% annual chance floodplains throughout the basin. And then very importantly, determined base flood elevations in every area, because in the existing floodplains, not every floodplain had a particular elevation assigned for it. So that's kind of a challenge when you're building and setting finished floor elevations. Now, so for comparison, through our modeling, through our updated data, we estimated an extent of about 8,300 acres of floodplain. Now, in comparison, the FEMA maps for the same areas, they had about 6,500. So it's about a 27% increase. And I think that's been fairly consistent with some of the other basin studies that are being completed. Again, a lot of it, floodplains in the same areas you'd expect, the rivers and lakes, but more detailed assessment of risk. Now, what's the implication for this project? One of the things we have in the scope is to take this information and develop a FEMA letter of map revision package. And essentially what this is getting all the data together that would be appropriate and meeting the requirements to submit to FEMA if the county so chooses to do that. Now, a couple things to note on this data. It's formatted in the particular way that FEMA would accept it as far as making the case for map revisions. But since we did do this watershed-wide, it would require sign-off from the cities because there's shared floodplains between the unincorporated areas and cities. And there would be public notice during the process. And then, so certainly the approval of the Board of County Commissioners. It's required to move forward, and we'll revisit that request at the end of the presentation. Now, this slide has a lot of numbers on it, but I think it's important to kind of give an idea of the impact of these changes in floodplains if they moved forward. So I'm going to step through this in a stepwise fashion. So what we have is floodplain change impact statistics. But essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the floodplains in terms of both unincorporated areas and city areas. I think it's important to make that distinguish, since the county is funding this project. But also looking in terms of impacted parcels versus impacted buildings. Now, the difference there is when we look at the floodplains and how they may impact parcels, we can flag areas that may be impacted, any portion of that parcel impacted. But that may be just a little corner or a portion that may be nowhere near a building or some other type of facility that there's a real flood risk. As opposed to looking at buildings and habitable structures and those footprints, whenever they intersect these floodplains that we've delineated, that's a little bit more important because that affects potentially the insurance, the rates, and the more of the risk for the people living in those areas or working in those areas. So the first line in this is the total in the watersheds we're looking at. For example, in the unincorporated area, there's an estimate of about 26,453 buildings, habitable building structures, residential, commercial, in the watershed. In the cities, about 7,900. Now, if you go to the second line, total existing FEMA floodplains, what that is what portions of these are within the FEMA floodplains, the old floodplains. So, for example, there's in the unincorporated areas, there's 3,800 parcels that touch a floodplain, that are impacted by floodplain, but about 928 actual structures or building footprints. And you see the numbers as well for areas specifically within the city. The third line, total proposed new floodplains. So with these new floodplains, the ones that we've modeled, that we've developed, you're looking at about 1,100 buildings within the limits that touch these new floodplains, and about 612 in the city as far as just buildings. And we haven't broken out in the smaller text between residential and commercial, just as an FYI. But now, the thing to realize is it's not at all just with new floodplains that you're getting new, because new people within the floodplains. There's also potential, because of the more accurate data, for people to be removed from the floodplains. So these last two lines are a little bit more of information to put that in context. So there's the fourth line added with new floodplains. So with our new floodplains, in comparison to the FEMA, they're actually looking at in the unincorporated areas about 784 structures. Even though there's 1,100 total in the newer delineated floodplains, only 784 are actually maybe new to that. But in the last line, we actually have numerous that are removed from the floodplains based on these delineations and the approximate building footprints, so about 601. So I think it's important to point out that if there's a decision to move forward with floodplains, it's not just new people getting into the floodplains, it's the potential for people to be removed. And flood insurance is not cheap sometimes, so there's a potential impact there. But we also want to put in context between county areas and city areas. The city areas, of course, need to make their own decisions related to the floodplains. So I'll be glad to answer any more questions or dig in the details of that, but I did want to take some time and step through that. I thought it was valuable. Now, when we talk about these basin assessments, really we're looking at the health, the condition, what we need to do in the watershed. So we take this line of evidence approach. So there's many lines of evidence that point us to, okay, what needs to be improved, what needs to be a good project in the basin. So this kind of just goes through the different criteria that we put together, and we put it all in a ranking system and weight things. We don't take one line of evidence and move forward on that and say you have to spend a lot of money based on one thing. We try to get it all weighted together. Now, very important is county staff input. County staff knows where the problems are with the flooding, where they've had the headaches, where they have the maintenance issues, and been out in the field and seeing this, particularly during the recent storms. Public input was very important as well. When we had the public meetings, we listened, we took the information, wrote it down, investigated some of these areas, listened to them. They often know things that the county staff doesn't know, and of course, because they see the impacts of their property. There's also the model results, the things we talked about, the level of service, the floodplains, that also feed into that. Those are analytical tools, but they shouldn't be the catch-all for pointing things that you need to spend a lot of money on. We also looked into documented problem areas. There's some good sources. There's the 2018 Stormwater Master Plan. That was done, list of things, but what we really tried to do was vet those and say, okay, are these real? Are these valuable to move forward? How we confirm them through our new analysis. And again, complaints, and then also we had Fay and Irma data that we looked back, but right in the middle or towards the end of this project, we had Ian come through, which unfortunately, provided a lot of valuable data to help us vet the project as well. So just want to step through to make sure that there's a lot of ways we look at developing and recommended these projects. On the water quality side of things, that was the flooding side. The water quality side of things, we look at things such as proximity to impaired waters or sensitive resources. We have the spring, we have the rivers, but we also have some lakes that have very good water quality. We want to keep them that way, but some of them need some work. The results of that pollutant load assessment that I showed on the previous slide, looking at areas that don't have current water quality treatment. There's a good bit of the watershed, particularly in the southern area, that's been developed for decades and before a lot of the current stormwater regulations have come on board. So there's not the water quality treatment that you may see, for example, in the newer, say, areas around Heathrow or in the northern parts. And again, the master plan had some targets. So there's kind of a sense of the background of where we put all this stuff together to be able to rank projects. Now, what we had in the scope was the opportunity to take a certain number of those projects after identified to a conceptual level. And what this helps with is when this project is done, the county can hit the ground running, looking to seek grant funding, looking to go right into design and permitting and move some things forward to start doing that good in the project. So when we talk about that conceptual analysis, we're talking about conceptual level of detail, but moving forward with evaluating what are the benefits of them. Particularly the cost, of course, looking at what the cost benefit is. But looking at things such as constructability, easements, right-of-way requirements, water quality benefit, even public acceptance. So we want to vet these things and make sure they're what we term implementable projects, because we don't want to have the counties move forward with something that they find out, well, we just can't move forward with them, because there's too much of a constraint on land, or we can't construct it because of some constraint. Now, we also meet with the St. Johns River Water Management District, and I will say they were very forthcoming, very cooperative to kind of talk through all these projects and talk about all the permitting aspects, and so I want to make sure that they were also permittable when we're moving forward. So that's then the basis of the level of detail of what we do. Now, so what are the final ranked projects? You saw a preliminary list of this before, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but the ranked flood projects came down to this longer list. This is about 30-plus projects. Now, the way we categorize them, well, you can see on the map, they're going to spread throughout the watershed. We categorize them and color-coded them to be helpful and to kind of describe how they may move forward. Now, the green ones were the top priority ones that we have the ability to do that conceptual analysis, that detailed analysis. And the ones in the kind of the yellow, those are the ones after that list that can be worked on, tackled immediately, or at some point down the line following this study. Now, what's interesting is there's a few ones in gray, I think about 3 or 4 of them. Those are ones that our county is actually moving forward with now. So good news that some of the priority areas are already being worked on with current efforts by the county. There's also a couple other of the special areas that we talked about before, like Markham and Lake Sylvan, that we also focused and kind of brought to the forefront during this process as well, which again I'll talk about in just a moment. So how all this boils down as far as those conceptual projects is this consolidated list that we provided in the draft report package. Again, the cost projections, cost benefit, ranked in an order, suggested implementation order. Because some of the proximity of the projects, they were able to be consolidated to a certain extent to kind of get more bang for the buck, so to speak, and to be able to move forward. So this is the flooding project list. Here we have the water quality project list, the ranking, and you see a map which shows where these projects are. Again, you'll note, focused in the southern areas of the watershed where the older development is. So those are one of the priority projects came through. These are classified in 2 ways. The yellow were project areas identified either previously or through the analysis of needs that we did, the various lines of evidence. The purple were ones that came directly from the pollutant load analysis, those next kind of priority ones. But here is our list of the 13 water quality projects. Now, I will say, when we looked at this, we also looked for the opportunity to look at common areas between the flooding and water quality projects, and many of them can benefit from both at the same time. So there's some notes on here, flags of some of the areas that when we do a project, it can maybe meet both categories. So those are the lists of the projects. So putting them all together then, and based on preliminary costs, this is the list. You see the categories of blue flooding, purple flooding and water quality, and green water quality projects. It's the classifications we came up with. Based on the totals, we're looking at right now an estimate of $35+ million for implementing all these projects, which is no significant, amount, certainly, or no insignificant amount, sorry. But again, I want to reiterate, we went through the process of vetting these, and as far as this money, the dollars, as you well know, construction costs are very volatile these days, so we do need to point out $2023. But these costs also include our allotment for design and permitting CEI, so they make them truly implementation costs as opposed to just construction costs. And they do include a healthy contingency as well. So depending on when they be implemented, those can be taken into consideration. We'll note also that you have the new countywide master plan update going on right now, and we have been coordinating with that consultant to feed them these project recommendations so that they can reflect that in their plan as well. So, I wanted to step through. I talked about what these alternatives kind of are and how we assess them. Just want to step through just a few to give you just a visual real quick of what it is we're talking about and what some of them look like. Some of them are fairly straightforward and simple. Some of them get fairly complex, as you would know. But one example of a fairly straightforward one we feel is a priority area we identified, which is near the intersections of Markham Road and Timberbrook and Bridgewater. In this case, there's been instances of intersection flooding or flooding in the right-of-way that has inundated sidewalks, preventing pedestrian traffic. Particularly bad during Ian, where it took a while for the water to recede. Really, our approach here is a simple upgrading of the right-of-ways. They've, after maintenance and over time, they've kind of filled themselves in, become poorly graded. And regrade those, establish clear connections to the infrastructure and the outfalls to improve the conveyance there. Another example of a water quality specific project here's in the south of the basin. This is one of the subdivisions right near the Little Wekiva River that does not have any treatment based on the time it was developed. So this is an area to look for providing that treatment. What we do in these situations, what is convenient and works well, is installing a water quality treatment unit, in this case what we call a baffle box. It's essentially a box that can be fairly conservative footprint that goes and does a couple things. Not only does it allow the screening out of leaves and grass clippings and other organic, or trash and other organic matter, and keeping it out of the river from flowing down the storm sewer and out, but also has a nutrient-absorbent media in there, which really helps the phosphorus and nitrogen by having a filter, with low flows to be able to treat the water. And we have a number of recommendations for these in several locations based on the constraints of the existing development. This is an example of a flood and water quality project, an old, kind of underserved neighborhood, very mobile manor, very old, a lot of mobile homes and through here. This is an area that really has very, I would characterize as poor drainage or non-existent drainage. No swales along the road or poorly graded swales. Water really can't get out to where it wants to get towards the west. So in these cases, it's difficult to do wholesale upgrades that are cost effective, but what we look at is at least reestablishing some swales, get the water to be able to drain downhill more effectively to the outfalls, create new outfall to be able to drain. That helps the flooding, helps get the water out of the yards, out of the right-of-way, and also can provide a little treatment. By the way we design the swales, we can hold on and infiltrate some water, which helps in that end as well. So this is an example, looking at more of a subdivision-wide flood and water quality project. Now those are just a few examples of the nature of some of the projects. Some of them pretty straightforward, some of them more complex. So I'm going to shift gears from the priority concept projects to then returning back to a little bit of a follow-up on the special areas that we were also looking at in the scope of work, starting with Lake Markham. Now, as you're aware, Lake Markham has been suffering from high stages, cumulative high stages over the last even few years, certainly exacerbated by Ian last fall. And so what has happened is the lake stages have kind of come up. There's been concerns, some docks underwater, yards being inundated a bit, septic tanks being encroached on. There's about 122 private parcels that border the lake. Thankfully, no homes impacted to date, and no really county facilities. The roadways have not been impacted, so access to there has been complete. So it's a backyard issue, essentially. But what we looked at was, okay, is there a feasible solution to help, maintain or control or recover lake stages from Lake Markham? Lake Markham is landlocked, which means there's no positive outfall currently. And so you have to find an outfall. A gravity outfall is just not feasible. You're not going to dig a trench, deep enough to do that. So you look at a pump option. There's really 3 ways that it could possibly go that we saw. One is to Lake Sylvan, but that doesn't make good sense because Lake Sylvan has its own challenges with high water. So the Yankee Lake, potentially feasible, or directly to the west to the Wekiva River. The Wekiva River is a much shorter distance, is more cost-effective than going to Yankee Lake and not having to cross 46. So we focused on that alternative. Now, what we looked at was a path that you have to pump from the lake, you have to site a pump station, and then you have to have a force main that then pumps it somewhere, right, to the Wekiva River to the west. So you have to get, since it's all private property around the lake, you have to get easements, to get that path, to get that pipe, that intake to go, to be able to site a pump station, which likely would have to go somewhere along some county right-of-way, along Longwood Markham Road there, and then a force main to get over the Wekiva. Some other constraints are the idea of water quality. When we talk to the Water Management District, concerned about water quality, just taking water from one area to the Wekiva River, which is, of course, a very big concern there. So there's some permitting issues as well as right-of-way and easements. But bottom line is, from an engineering standpoint, it's feasible to pump water from point A to point B. That's just the cost benefit of it. What we looked at is a pump station that would provide a level of service benefit for flooding. And bottom line take home is a very large pump station would be necessary to maintain not only eliminating flood impacts for a 10-year storm, which we think is the minimum reasonable, but also be able to recover successfully a extreme storm event, get it down, recover the lake stages within a reasonable amount of time, say 3 days. Now, all that, the take-home there is that the estimate is about close to $15 million to be able to size a pump station, the large force main, get all the easements, all the property to be able to do that. So the take-home here, as we see the evaluation, is, yes, it's feasible to pump, but what we have to consider is the benefit to the 122 private parcels with a $15 million price tag. It's a pretty it's seemingly low cost benefit. And if there's any more questions specific on that, I would love to be glad to answer and talk more about it. But I want to move on to Lake Sylvan. Simpler story. Again, lake level issues and concerns over in the past years, but it does have a positive outfall. Now the challenge with this outfall is it has a high level outfall, but it does have a sluice gate, and it's open at the higher level. And when time comes, when conditions warrant, the county has on numerous occasions gotten emergency authorizations from the district, from the Water Management District, to lower that, to be able to drain it down about a foot lower. What we talked with the district under this thing is, why not, let's go through a process of get a permit to let the county operate that and have control over that. Possibly being able to make the decision, the call based on lake levels and conditions to be able to lower that sluice gate based on county decisions and criteria, keeping the Water Management District in the loop, but having control over it, or simply, if it makes sense, to leave it at that lower elevation to provide a lower control, reasonable control for Lake Sylvan. So that's what we developed, package that we can go in the next step and interface with the district to look down the road on that possibility. Potentiality, I would say. Last special area we talked about was a focus on the Little Wekiva River. A lot of attention, a lot has been spent on there. The issues, as you're aware of, it's very flashy, very urban in many of the areas, a lot of erosion, sedimentation, the focus of some Senate bills here recently. So what we had to do is want to take a step back, take a holistic look at what is the kind of the past, present, and future of the Little Wekiva River. What we want to look at, what's been done, what's being done now, and what maybe makes sense to go forward. Now, what we did, and this is very busy, and, it's not very hard to read, but this is an exhibit from our report that really kind of does a couple things. It assesses the profile of the river, which, as you may be aware, from the county line to the end, it drops from 55 to 5 feet. Quite a bit of elevation change for Central Florida. So there's a lot of areas of very high velocity. But what we did is we plotted out and researched and looked at all the areas where there's been some stabilization projects, both from the county, City of Altamont Springs, others. These included bank stabilization, including small-scale erosion things. Plotted them out where they've been done, where are the gaps, those gaps warrant some additional attention, and looked holistically at what makes sense. Now, this did include also, I think we have the 3 NRCS projects that are about to, go online in the Wekiva River, so we consider the location of those and the impacts of those. And we did have an opportunity to look, get a lot of data before Ian and some data after Ian to be able to do a comparison as well. It all boils down to some recommendations as some areas to look at, but then some specific areas that we were able to do based on our detailed survey of the unincorporated areas of the Little Wekiva, where we literally went up and down the river. We not only got survey cross-sections that help with our modeling, but we were able to look at outfalls, the pipe outfalls that come into the river, and some of the bridge interfaces and some of the erosion and other issues, as well as how some of the other previous improvements are holding up that were done. This resulted in, you can see here, little green dots on the map, areas that we recommend some level of action, ranging from just simple maintenance to maybe replacing the end of an outfall pipe to maybe looking at some other more specific erosion control measures. So those recommendations are captured in the report. So with that, that's the technical information. Just real quick on the schedule. This is easy because we're right at the end. So we're right here in June with the final commission to the board, and with the input from you and from staff, we'll be planning to wrap up the final report information by next month in July. Now, we come to this part, what we have requested is some board action, consider accepting the watershed study, but there's also the issue of the implication of the floodplains and direction on whether or not to move forward with the FEMA letter or map revision, based on what we discussed earlier in those conditions. So that's on the table for the end of this presentation. And with that, I believe there's just an acknowledgement. Yeah, again, I want to thank Jean and Shannon working with you all through this process of really getting a lot of good input. I'd like to thank the various public, which we did get great input on this project as we brought things to conclusion. And then there's the thank you. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you for letting me ride through and do a little bit of a review, but hopefully got to some important meat of the presentation. So
Thank you, Mr. Hillard. Commissioner Zembauer, you asked to be recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, first, thank you and Geosyntec for the good work that you guys are doing. I know not only on this basin study, but across the entire county. I know you've got several studies going on. I think in light of Ian, I would think that we would all probably agree that the LOMAR should be filed. We've struggled with that in the past because of the obvious that was in the presentation, that some people are now going to be put in a floodplain that are not in a floodplain. Others may be taken out of a floodplain. And we've learned from Ian in certain areas that were not in floodplains, that those individuals, had they known they were in floodplains, could have taken different deployment of flood insurance and other mitigating things that they just weren't informed. They didn't know. So I think that we've got to have some very candid conversation on what we do with the LOMAR. And I would support following the LOMAR.
Okay. Commissioner Herr?
I have just a few questions. So if you go to slide 12, just because I think we're going to be asked to explain this, I concur with Commissioner Zembauer. These folks are in a floodplain. It just hasn't been declared a floodplain. And therefore, I feel if we don't file it, we're in essence misleading the public in terms of the safety of their home. And while it may cost them more in the short run in terms of insurance, we may actually save their entire life savings by virtue of not having an uninsured disaster. but I just want to understand the numbers. So if I look at the total proposed new floodplains, should that not be the total of the total existing and the added? So if I add 3827 plus 3386, it's not. But intuitively, when I read it, I would think it would be.
Yeah, well,
Show me your work,
yes.
like a math teacher.
Well, I'd like
I think
the
we'd like
answer
to hear it from the
expert.
consultant.
Yeah, so, well, looking at the second line, total existing FEMA, that's the total, within the existing FEMA, right? And then the third line, total proposed new floodplains, which includes a lot of those, but not all of them from the FEMA. So when you talk about, so it's not directly additive because you got the added with new floodplains, the 784, for example, under the unincorporated
So
buildings.
it's the
and
595 is coming out, right? It's also not that. That doesn't add up either. So I would just ask you to take that away. It's off by about 300. I think if we move forward with this, we got to have really good numbers as to what it is we're doing, just from the
So
perspective of accuracy.
We can certainly revisit making this a little
Clearer.
clearer. Yes, yes, good comment.
Yep. And then, with regard, I'm going to start a little bit backwards with slide 23, and this is Lake Sylvan. I do applaud the effort to get control over the weir, the fact that we have to wait a day or two for somebody to respond when the citizens are very well aware of the fact that it's up above the level. And so I would support either getting control of it or lowering it has been the request. I do think, though, in dry season, at some point, we will hit the opposite end of this cycle. We will be on the other side of that when folks' boats are high and dry, but maybe that's less dangerous to deal with than what we're dealing with right now. If I flip back to 22, this is probably a question for Paul or Darren. This is a very large struggle for me to think that we're going to spend $15 million for 122 private properties that built on a closed basin that we know was a closed basin when we built the properties and built pools out in and all of that. We permitted it, to be clear, before somebody sends me an email as we speak. Is this an MSBU opportunity? I realize it is a gigantic number, but if they would like to invest in this improvement, is that an opportunity? You can say, I don't know, and bring it back.
I don't think it would be precluded, but we would research that further.
So I would ask that we research that just to understand where it is we go with that, because that one I think is a significant challenge. And I too would support moving forward with the filing.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you very much. And all I was going to say, because the numbers are correct, if you take 3,800 and 3,300, add them up, minus the 595, it comes to 6,618. So in page 12. So I think that's what you're getting at, and because I looked at it from the unincorporated also, that if you take the 928 and the 784 and minus the 601, it comes up to 1111. But the question I have is, on the 601, the ones that are taken out, about where are they? Are they kind of clustered? Where is that location?
It really varies throughout the watershed. There's not a specific.
It's not a specific
clustering area, and a lot of them are maybe just fringes of where they were before. So the floodplain moved, and you are right based on what was said before. This analysis doesn't create floodplains, it just exposes them, So.
All I was going to say is there's a lot of people that I know that are individual houses that have complained to me in the past that they are not in the floodplain, never been flooded, blah, 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 and, they're individual homes, and so that might be the case. And on page 10, just explain to me the blue as opposed to the green and the AE, and specifically what that means when you talk about the floodplain assessment results.
Okay, so the lighter blue, which, making sure, yeah, the AE, those are the new floodplains where we define those base flood elevations. So those are essentially what we classically think of floodplains. There are small areas of A. Those are relegated to areas, really transitional areas between floodplains. Like if you, just getting in the weeds a little bit, but if you have an idea of some of these areas are depressional and bowls, you have the floodplain spills, would maybe fill up that bowl, impact things, and then spill over to the next basin as it kind of works its way downstream. There's flowage areas or between floodplains that happen, and we delineate those as well for risk purposes, but do not assign them a specific elevation. So that's what the A ones represent.
Okay. And I just wanted to concur that I support the fact that we have to move forward. It's doing a disservice to our citizens if they think that they don't live in the floodplain and they do, or vice versa. And, whether it be now, of course, as we've talked about, we've got to get the city involved, the cities involved in this, but I think that's mostly just Altamont Springs is the primary city that's involved. The rest of them would not be affected, maybe Lake Mary, a little bit
of Lake
Sanford.
Mary and a little bit of Longwood.
Anything in Sanford?
No.
Okay. So I think that we need to start working with them also, but we need to move forward with this on the floodplain, just like we need to move forward on the Little Wekiva as quickly as we possibly can. I see some people out there that would be strongly supportive of that. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Delary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, thank you very much. I also want to thank you, and not just your staff, but our staff and the cities, because I know there's been a lot of interaction between the different staffs as well as the citizens. I also want to thank you publicly because you did the presentation for Calino last week. I got feedback from the individuals at Calino, really appreciate it, got a lot of information from it. And they were actually told me that they found it very informative and educational. So looking forward to seeing what they're going to do with it. One of the questions I have is how dynamic is the modeling that you're having? How easy is it to use?
How easy is it to use? There's a couple levels there, Commissioner Delary. Easy to use in the sense that you can press a button and let the model run, and it will give you some results. But then, of course, how to interpret those results is one end, but also how to build things in a reasonable manner. The models are fairly complex and can do some very sophisticated things, but they're all based on the data that goes into it. And we never have the resources to represent the real world exactly as it is. So
But the model has been verified with all the past storms that we've had.
Yes.
So that if we did get a significant rainfall, you could figure out rather quickly where the trouble spots were.
Yeah, in fact, the idea is, and I think we talked about this last week, was the idea of building a model, being able to vet it with real-world data, Ian and Irma, which we did, and then also be able to use that as a predictive tool for the future, to be able to say, well, maybe we have this other situation that may come and drop another 18 inches on Seminole County. Can we use these models as a tool to kind of predict what may happen based on current lake levels and stages? So there's that ability to leverage those models in that way.
That's what I was getting at. And I think that this tool, not just with the basin that you're studying presently, but the other basins, as well as we do a holistic stormwater model throughout the county, we'll be able to look at that to see where, as storms do happen, you can see where the trouble spots will potentially be forming because of time. We all know that it's not just when it's raining, it's after it rains. The residual effect of what's going to happen with that storm days to come, that's really the big issue.
Yeah.
With the slide that you have up there now, I think it's slide 10, can you talk to us about the 26.7% increase? What is that?
As far as the origin or why there's the increase over that, really it's as I said, some of it's new development and different development that just change, which actually sometimes mitigates floodplains if the development is done correctly. But a lot of it is just that level of detail. When FEMA approaches these traditionally, they would look at the major conveyances, the major lakes, the major connections between them. And simply because they didn't have the good topographical information or the frankly, the budget to do a more detailed job. So they hit those major risk areas. So with what we have with the tools we have today and the data we have today in an economical way, we can go and kind of fill in the gaps in some of those areas which actually represent a flood risk and have a flood risk that just, I don't want to say skipped over, but they weren't addressed by the FEMA consultant. And so that, I would say, is probably the majority of what we look at as far as the difference in acreage between one and the other and where that increase would come from.
So in the briefing I had with you, the way I believe you described it to me was that with the increase of technology that we're having, especially LiDAR, that you can define where those flood-prone areas are today that you couldn't have done in the past.
Yes, much better and much more economically.
And so a lot of that percentage is coming from that as well. I just want to make sure that we're putting that on the record.
Right. Yes, I would agree with that, yeah.
And then with the heat maps that you actually have for water quality and flood, we could overlay those, correct, to figure out where the big trouble spots are, couldn't we?
Yeah. All the data that we generate that you see is in GIS format that would be provided to the county. So we use it for these existing projects, these conceptualized ones, but for the ones and things to come that can be used as a resource for that as well.
And then can you also talk to us about any joint projects that are coming up? Because you talked about our projects. You did not talk about future city projects. Because if there's a city project that's happening in this basin, even though we're only talking about the county, we should really be partnering with those cities to get the biggest bang for the buck, because the water will flow across jurisdictional lines. Have we discussed that at all?
Yeah, in the various meetings, give a quick nutshell. The areas in Lake Mary within the watershed, Lake Mary is essentially, hey, we're all good. We're all good there, and there are no issues. Longwood, there are some areas that butt up against that, and Longwood's in, I think, an invest from our meetings with them in kind of a mode of doing like we talked about, which was taking this data and then doing the next step further, doing their own detailed analysis to revisit and identify their project areas. There are some at the fringe, at the common border, that may overlap, mutual benefit. Not necessarily anything clearly straddling the line between the city and the county, but some opportunities there. Altamont is really the one with the biggest interface, mainly because of the Wekiva River going through there. They're certainly still looking at measures in the big turn in the river to look for improvements. The county portion of the river goes in Altamont Springs, then out, then back in and over. So there's the potential there. Another one of the key areas that they've been interested in is the Hillview area, kind of south of the main part of the city, where the county's currently doing a project, roadway improvement project, but a lot of the areas around there are in Altamont, and they've been really concerned about the floodplains in that area between some of the adult toy store, the boat, place there all the way over to Spring Lake. So a lot of conversations about that, and they are, I think, also have been very tuned in to seeing some of the data, preliminary data, to be engaged in looking at ways that they can leverage.
I just think it's important that we leverage not just our dollars, but the city's projects together to get the biggest bang for the buck. Can you talk to us a little bit about Lake Markham? John, we know it's a closed basin. In recent history, we're getting reports that, water levels are going up. Can you talk to us about why? People have not seen it, and is it just because of recent history, or is it something that's actually happened?
Yeah, and we did spend some time in the last presentation talking about it in more detail. I think since then and since December, it has come down a couple feet, so that's great, great news for the folks out there. We did look closely at potential, lines of evidence for why that water level is happening, and over the course, the nutshell, our conclusion was the primary driver that we saw was hydrological. In other words, there's just been cumulative rainfall over the past several years, that because it's a landlocked system, it's without a positive outflow, it's much more sensitive to ambient groundwater. So that builds up over a long period of time rather than a short period of time like surface water. So there was that, but we did look into, there's some concerns about new development, there's concerns about the 46 construction. We did not find specific compelling evidence for any of those to be a smoking gun, if you will, on the lake levels. Can't discount some small contribution from some of those other factors, but in our analysis, the most compelling factor was hydrological, because there had been a cumulative increase in rainfall in the years leading up to, I think of it, 2020 through 21, like 2018 to 21 or so, and maybe we're getting out of that a little bit, but that seemed to be the lead cause. And it is tricky because it's landlocked. It's difficult and very slow to recover in those systems. And it's Lake Markham is not alone. There's similar lakes in Seminole County and Orange County. There's Big Sand Lake is one that's almost very similar, that's experiencing the same type of issues. So,
With the Lake Silden, and I agree that'd be great to get control of that weir. How long do you think that permitting could take?
well, that's the
In your estimate?
an estimate. Typically, the process we've seen is there's an initial 90-day review period. They generally have questions, an RAI request for additional information that we respond to within 30 or 60 days, and then they have another 90 days to approve. So potentially a 6 to 9 month process,
Okay.
at the earliest, depending on their workload.
Okay, great. And then I agree that we should be fully transparent with all the citizens regarding any new additional floodplain areas, but, and to submit it to the proper authorities. But I think before we do that, we need to be transparent to actually identify the public so that they know exactly what's happening, and not to just get a notice in the mail that the county and now the state and the feds are doing this. We need to be proactive to get ahead of this so that people understand exactly what's happening before they get the notice from their insurance company. I think that would be advantageous so that everyone understands exactly what's happening. That is the end of my questions. Thank you very much. Very informative.
Wanted to quickly say that I'm supportive of the LOMR as well. We will accept, by way of a motion, the acceptance of the study. I want to talk about subdivision retrofit, because that's essentially what a lot of these projects are. They're older neighborhoods that we've identified that we didn't have the technology or the design standards or whatever at the time, and so we're going back in and we're retrofitting them. And you may not be able to speak to this, and I'll ask county staff to address it. There was a study done and funds allocated in 2003-ish for a subdivision retrofit program. It was a 5-inch thick binder that sat on my bookshelf. And it was full of projects that had been identified. Could we find out how many of those projects were completed from that time frame? And if they are still, if they are some of the ones that we are identifying now that had been originally identified in 2004, or are we coming up with new projects and just forgetting the old ones? I would kind of like to have an idea of where we are with that, because we are really, really good at doing studies around here, and we are really, really good at putting them on a shelf. And I just, for historical purposes and for gut check purposes, want to know if what we said we were going to do in 2003, 2004 happened, or if we're just doing it yet again. And right. So I would love that. And so any help that you can give staff to make that happen, I think would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I do. I can speak within the context of the Wekiva watershed. The 2018 master plan, countywide master plan, did have within it a review of all that, including the subdivision rehabilitation program, all the other needs. So they did capture it with the idea of updating, like you said, what has been done, what has been completed, what's still out there as a need. So specific to the Wekiva watershed, I can't say using that as a resource. We did review the information from that, what you're mentioning on the subdivision previous effort as part of what we did to vet those projects and see what had been done versus still out there for the Wekiva. And staff could probably speak to, on a countywide basis.
Okay. I think that would be incredibly helpful. I also want to say, from Commissioner Hurst's perspective, talking about the
The disappearance of the children, aged 13, 9, 4.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this,
Columbia. They were
Scrolling
flying in a
websites during the meeting can be a backfire on you. It's possible.
Technology is a wonderful
Now
thing.
revealing the mother survived for 4 days before telling her children to go on without her and succumbing to her injuries.
On a positive note for Commissioner Constantine, I will defer to his math. I did not carry a 1 somewhere along the way, so your math was correct, Commissioner Constantine. And so I give credit
I
where
can't
credit
figure out how to
is
turn
due.
this.
Sister Rose would be annoyed with me.
Your technology
Didn't carry
acumen
one.
is a far different story.
And all I was trying to do is take something off of
Anything else happening in the world we need to know
Right.
about at the moment?
No.
The children
no, we're not
were saved.
deviating.
So regarding the Lake Markham alternative, I will say I am in complete agreement with Commissioner Herr that a $15 million price tag for that scenario is a little, gives me a little bit of heartburn. I completely understand if there were homes in jeopardy. Granted, there are assets that are currently not able to be used that people invested in, but I'll say it again, if you're building a dock in Seminole County, it should be floating.
Yes.
That is just, it is, from my perspective, something we have seen for many, many years. Water levels fluctuate in these lakes, and to invest the kind of money that people do in these structures is remarkable to me, to only have it be usable when the water is at a perfect level, not too high, not too low, like a little bit of, Goldilocks-ish dock building. It's a lot of money, and that it really gives me pause. I am thrilled to partner with any cities that are willing to partner, try to prioritize as far as that goes, use the most bang for the buck, I think was the phrase that was used earlier. I think that's really the only comments that I had. Commissioner Delary, and then Commissioner Herr,
One
and
more
then
follow-up
Commissioner
question, Madam
Zembauer.
Chairman, if I have.
Yep.
So, Mark, we've heard from various people during storms, open up the valve or close the valve, in the water system, stormwater system. We all get the emails. Are there any mechanical or valves upstream and downstream that we have control of in your basin study that you've actually looked at?
Well, aside from the Lake Markham, which we just talked about, which is an operable gate.
I said that we control.
Yeah, none that I'm aware of. There's various gravity control and grade controls, but nothing specifically operable.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Herr, and then Commissioner Zembauer.
I was prepared to make a motion, Commissioner Zembauer, if you're...
Oh, please do. I'll give you a second. Can we
There
get the
you go.
motion first?
I move that we accept the watershed study and further move forward with filing the FEMA letter of map revision, along with the notion that the public is notified according to the county manager's direction.
Second.
There's a motion by Commissioner Herr, seconded by Commissioner Zembauer. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you very much.
Any other direction that you would like from the board?
Madam Chair,
Move the
I
other
just-
projects forward.
I just had one more thing I didn't want to get on, make sure we get on the record as
Okay.
it pertains to putting these studies on the shelf.
Yes.
We've covered this before, and maybe John maybe have to answer this, but I know Mark's done. With the basin studies we've done thus far up to this date, do you have a round number cumulative of costs associated to deploy those improvements on just those basin studies thus far?
Are you talking about how much costs are to do the basin study?
No,
Or
the
for
actual
example,
deploy the work. You take the study, which then
Okay.
details the work.
I'll give you a rough number about, you have Midway and you have Lake Harney. Those two of them will be close to 50 million, maybe less.
And then you got the little econ.
Lilligan, Vickygon is not done yet.
Right.
Completed.
You got Lake Harney.
Harney, we talk about it, Harney and Midway, close to 50 million together. And we have this, about 35 million. And we will have Lake Monroe. Lake Monroe will be big. We're not complete yet. It will be completed this year. And so hopefully by the end of next year, you'll have all good up-to-date data. And with the project, those projects, hopefully, what we concentrated with the consulting to be buildable and to be also permittable instead, because in the past, some of those reports, 20 years old or so, we tried to put them in the master plan. When we got to some of them, it is not permittable and not buildable. And I know the time it changed, but with the consulting, with those study, that's why we're trying to have data where we can take those data and put them 10 years, 15 years, whatever, depend on the funding. So we'll be able to do those.
And for the record, those would have to be ranked.
Yes.
Based on the benefit.
Right.
As was indicated over here. If you got to spend $50 million to benefit 122
Right.
property owners, and you spend $30 million to benefit 400 property owners, that changed the ranking along with other criteria. And so I think it's important we understand this is not something just because we've done the basin study that we are deploying the work product to make this happen. This identifies it. It'll then have to be ranked, programmed, once it's funded, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Seminole County, and I'm not advocating for this, but Seminole County is one of the few counties in the state that has no stormwater fee.
Right.
That typically these are funded through. So that would have to come out of either general revenue or the infrastructure sales tax fund.
Or a grant, we try also to.
Correct.
As a grant.
Great.
And here's the ranking, it is every study we do ranking like he did.
Right.
Like Mark did. But also, all those basins that go to we have the consulting Jacob, they updated the stormwater master plan, and they take all those data, and also we try to rank it and come up with 5 years, 10 years, and so on.
And when do you think you'll be able to have, in your words, 2023 numbers based on all the basin studies, what the entirety of the basin study improvements will be for the entire county that have been studied? You think it'll be at the end of this year, first quarter of next year? Just a guesstimate.
Yeah, we'll have the majority of it probably the first to mid of next year. Probably the third quarter we shouldn't to have all the basin.
Okay.
So that's was our goal, to have everything done by mid of next year, which is 2024, to the third quarter of it.
Great, thank you,
And if we
John.
can do it before,
Of course.
that's probably our plan.
Sure, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Any other questions for staff or county manager? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
We're going to move on to our library master plan. Mr. Durr?
Good morning. For the record, I'm still Rick Durr from earlier. I've switched hats, as you can tell. And today what we're going to be presenting to you is what we hope is the final complete master plan. We'll be asking you at the end, talking about master plans and moving them to the shelves and not wanting this to be one of them, to be able to accept the plan as it's written as really a working document for us to give guidance now and in the future. That we'll be asking for direction to begin programming in some of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, in future budgets, and then be able to bring back to you at a future date what a funding mechanisms might be in terms of actual physical expansion of the library system, when we're talking about buildings, that kind of a thing. So before we get started, there we go. Let me give you, over the next 8 slides or so, a brief overview of what we discussed at the work session last fall. You've heard from Godfrey's and Associates, that was our consultant on the project. They took us through and walked us through the entire scope of the project. And there was a number of things that we checked our existing inventory against, both Florida averages, our peer averages of the counties around us, as well as some state of Florida minimum standards. Some of this was, you had to look at it and swallow hard, but you know, we're brave about it. So in terms of library space per capita, this is where we fall at 0.21 square feet. That basically, since the system was built in 1987, that we've stayed level with the amount of square footage in the county. And as we've stayed level, the rest of the population has continued to grow. So this chart illustrates over the last several decades, from 1980 to now, how the continued demand has continued to soar in terms of square footage available for our residents. An in-depth analysis was done on overall affordability, and one of the good things that we see here is that we're pretty good value for the community in a number of different ways, and I'll get to that in a second. So this was our good news, bad news slide that said comparatively how our level of expenditures per capita, how that equates in a comparison, as well as just the number of staff that we have as well, and that's the center column. And then lastly, the good news on the third column says, clearly, we are getting the biggest bang for our buck, because we're right along with Florida standards in terms of the library collection. So really what that states is that we're really putting our dollars into the materials that are available to the general public and trying to keep pace with those folks. We went through a pretty good public participation process through here. We heard from over 6,800 residents. And some of the real simple questions is are they very or somewhat satisfied? And you see what the results were. In addition to this, our consultant had interviews with all of the cities, interviews with, keep swatting this thing, interviews with all of you, and certainly working side by side with staff. So there was a lot of input into this. Again, the good news here is that we've got a lot of support throughout the community, as well as a lot of use. And we're very proud of the fact Christine and Christine Patton, Christine Patton, our division manager, Kathy Eflin, who works along with Christine in the administration, does a great job at directing resources to the satisfaction of our public. We looked at geographic areas, and why that's important, you'll see in just a moment, about our existing facilities and how they now relate to our largest growth areas since we've constructed the library system back in 1987. Then lastly, where we left you last fall was we laid out, our consultant laid out preliminary 5, 10, 20-year goals over that threshold with a number of different improvements that were listed. So at that particular time when we presented this to you, the question was, how do you implement? Where do you start? So what we put together is a framework for implementation, and that's been a favorite term in use today in this particular meeting, that we need to put together a framework and still be flexible moving forward. So while we've identified needs and we've identified our near, medium, and long-term priorities, we still need to be flexible on how we present those and how we'll implement those. So this is a short list. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But in the actual master plan document, I've worked on a lot of master plans in the past. This has to be the most detailed implementation plan I've ever seen, and certainly I've never written one like this detail. It literally goes quarter by quarter from this quarter to 2040 by quarter. So we're not going to review all of those today. This is the consultant saying, hey, if this is what you want to implement it, this is how you would go about doing this. So again, this is very much a working master plan, but it keeps us on our toes, if you will, and knowing where we should be spending our time moving forward. So in identifying, and I'll say it again, the low-hanging fruit, it really breaks down into 3 different areas. Number 1 is staffing. Taking advantage of technology to help automate those repetitive tasks, and we're working on some of that right now with the implementation of just verification of library cards and the processing of library cards. Adding paraprofessionals to support our professional librarians. The workforce continues to adapt and change, and we want to make sure that we have the right folks working in certain positions so that we can continue to grow along with the community. Excuse me. The use of technology. During COVID, we went to the locker system. We've retained all of that, and it's been a fantastic success. What we'll be looking for now is the next generation, if you will, of technology that's available to help automate some of those repetitive tasks. So the idea of having a self-checkout or automated sorting, those are things that we put into our planning for future budgets. That other systems are looking at lending laptops and tablets, so not having necessarily more of the desktop models where folks are using that in the library itself, but having that flexibility, as well as looking at how do we then expand to a 24-hour, 7 days a week, unstaffed operation. So the ability to have them in secured areas, be able to lock the library itself, but still have a common area for folks that maybe, the shift that they work in doesn't line up with our hours of operation. So we'll still be able to deliver service at any time. And then lastly, we talked about this at the last work session, the idea of lending or vending kiosks, of being able to move these or at least put these in locations where we have a need, and then continuing, to monitor that growth as we then build or implement new libraries in particular areas, being able to relocate these to other needed areas and help pretty much have us grow into a particular neighborhood or a particular area that is really far away from one of our existing libraries. So that was really the low-hanging fruit, if you will, moving forward through the plan. Next, you get into the capital, and this is the big one. How do we start building buildings, and where do we start doing that? So part of this also states that in the near term, we start to work on what that looks like. So item number 2, commission a working building program statement. The master plan identifies a number, at least in square feet, that's pretty average, but looking at adopting a larger footprint, if you will, that our existing footprint of our buildings, as we saw, are pretty small comparatively to the demand for them, and then start planning for and the construction of new facilities. Now, this is where the framework comes in. This is a prioritized list of new or renovated buildings throughout the county. You can see it starts at the end of this decade and moves all the way to 2043. So we still need to be flexible, but at the same time, we've put together a list of here's where you would start based on need moving forward. So that's where the closing in the gaps in some of our geographic coverage comes from. It talks about, maybe the potential of putting a kiosk in the Sanford area, a kiosk in the Heathrow area, where we currently, for example, that will help at least provide service in those areas that have to draw a long way to participate in our infrastructure, library infrastructure, all the way down to where we need to put new buildings. The idea being is that we're not going to snap our fingers and suddenly we're going to jump right up to the minimum 0.6 standard, but that we'll look at taking steps over the next 2 decades to get us to that level. So in terms of a capital plan, you see some dates and you see some areas. These are, again, a work in progress, if you will. The bottom line on these 3 items is that we've identified that probably the greatest need that we have in our system right now is in the Oviedo Winter Springs area. You can take either one of those 2 items and interchange them going forward. The idea being that our east branch right now, which is in Oviedo, is probably our most popular branch and certainly our busiest branch, and it probably has the smallest footprint of all of our libraries. So the idea would be is if we were looking to build, it would be in that particular area. To build a new building in the Winter Springs Oviedo area, we'll start to take some of the load coming into the East Branch. The second one is replacing the North Branch in Sanford. We have different needs in downtown Sanford. We know we'll be losing the big parking lot across the street at some point through redevelopment. And then the building is just really, really small for that location. We can't expand there. So the idea being that we go ahead and we build a new building somewhere located in Sanford in the future, and those two, and again, I'll continue to flip-flop the top 2 on that list, and making sure that those are the 2 probably neediest areas in terms of folks being able to access the library. So what does a 35,000 square foot library look like? And our architect provided a sketch of how you would do this. Clearly, this is a larger footprint than anything that we have in our inventory today. The idea being is that lightish orange color are all public spaces. You don't see any walls blocking them off, lots of area around the stacks. And then also to have a children's section, for example, that might be on the right, subdivided over from sort of the general purpose areas in the stacks as well, and being able to focus those areas. Right now, we've got children sometimes right up against fiction, just adult fiction, if you will, just because that's all we have the space for at this particular, at this time in our facilities. It also talks about having flexible use and additional meeting spaces. We saw this during COVID. This was a big deal and a big observation on our part. The idea of groups of very small to somewhat larger groups and being able to facilitate a number of different programs in different spaces. So if we're going to build meeting rooms or smaller work rooms, to make sure that we've got a good variety and some flexible space in there, and then obviously we'll have all the support areas. So that was our early capital items in terms of need and priority. The second one would then start to take a look at replacing, for example, in another decade, our Lake Mary location. We had an expansion of the parking area in that a couple of years ago. That helped with some of the problems that we're having there in terms of folks being able to just be able to park on that site. But clearly, we are now built out on that property, so there's no more going. You'd have to go up at this point, and that's something certainly we could look at in the future. The first thing that's listed, however, is Central Branch. Right now, Central Branch is also our administrative offices that manages the collection and the distribution of all of our materials countywide. The recommendation on that said what we really need to do is relocate that administrative function. That includes your back area where all of these books are staged and we receive books that are coming in and books going out. That, excuse me, that be relocated, and then the square footage that's remaining be renovated so that the entire structure is public space. So that is at least the recommended future of Central Branch, and we're looking at that in the next decade moving forward. Then lastly, in the long-term priorities are some of the areas that are on further down the list, continually looking at and evaluating the effectiveness of our library kiosks, so that we're not just leaving them in place, that we're reevaluating those throughout the years. And then obviously in the next 20 years, we'll be looking at doing a new library master plan as well. Item number 4 continues to say we must continue to reevaluate our staffing across the board and mirror that based on both need as well as the job market. So there were some dollars that were put in here. This is not additive, so I won't, there's no math involved with this one, other than saying on the second line, in today's dollars, what's a new 35,000 square foot building, which is a standalone building, is probably closer to 20 million at this point. So a number of different things that are listed on here, 12 million in today's dollars, again, for renovating the entire Central Branch, going all the way down to a new self-service kiosk at a much lower level, as well as making sure that as we move forward with any of these improvements, we are staffing at levels that are appropriate to the services being provided. So in terms of our toolbox, I don't want to say this goes from lowest to largest all the way down the end, but it kind of fell out a lot that way. First and foremost, we do receive state aid to libraries. The idea being that that's not going to get us a building plan. That's in range from the state, distributed on a yearly basis, has landed anywhere between $130,000 to $150,000. So clearly, that's not going to be enough to get a new building. We'll continue to pursue grants. We've adjusted our impact fees. That was done by this board last year. We've started to see the uptick, but that will also get us only so far. And there was a lot of discussion, and there has been, as there should be, in partnership efforts with the 7 cities. And in last October, we presented the master plan to the mayors and managers group. A lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of folks saying, we'd love to partner with you all if you've got money. So it's obviously, we're all consistent. We all share the same space here in the county, but also being open to mixed-use partnerships. So the idea that as a developer comes in to redevelop a parcel, for example, there may be an opportunity in the photographs that are shown where you've got residential units above the libraries at the ground floor. That's also the way that you start to make these things 24/7. You can plan for that in developments like this, so you always have folks that are there at your home base, for example. Clearly, some of the low-hanging fruit we'll be looking for is identifying money in the general fund, and then as we've had conversations in the past, evaluating the applicability to potential sales tax. So, back to what we were here to ask for today. Accepting the master plan as a working document, directing staff to begin to work on the near-term actions, and then directing us to be able to come back to you in the future with how do we start to look at a new building program, if you will, to expand our footprint in Seminole County. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Commissioner Zembauer and then Commissioner Delary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rick, thank you very much for putting this together. I know this is something we've been discussing for 5 years, I think, since Commissioner Lockhart and I arrived here, and I'm sure it was being discussed before then. I'm very happy that we're looking at the public-private partnership aspect. I know when I raised this, I don't know, 4 years ago, and the concept of maybe having, you know, living quarters above a library, or even having a multi-use from fire station, library, living quarters for attainable housing. I think we've got to be smart, as we just learned in this little work session this morning. We have a lot of money to spend, which means we've got to find a lot of money to do all the things that this county needs and rightfully deserves. And I think we're going to have to be creative, and I think that private-public partnership is going to be key in moving this ball forward quicker and maybe in a more efficient fashion, understanding we're out of land. I mean, there's only so many parcels that we could do this on. So that's my input. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm happy to make a motion at this point, unless you want to continue to discuss it a little further.
Yeah, I think we're going to have Commissioner Delary and then other comments, and then we'll see where we are. Let's get everyone's input.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Rick, well done. I think you and your staff have done a phenomenal job, as well as the community, by providing input. We've talked about libraries for a while, as you very well know. In fact, I could tell you at one point we were going to move forward with some additions to the library, and then we actually did a survey, and the public basically said we want all our libraries, but they didn't want to pay for it. And that's been a big issue moving forward with a lot of things, but I'm glad to see that we're turning a corner. Some of the quick comments I have, and these are just comments, but I fully support what you're doing here, fully support what your direction is. I think it's a well-balanced direction and approach. I think that when you talked about in 27 and 28, either Winter Springs or Oviedo, we would do something. I think there needs to be on the slide, it actually needs to say that, because you actually commented it could be either or. If we don't say that on paper, someone's going to say, well, we were supposed to go ahead of the other one, and it was supposed to be in 27 or 28. And I just want to make sure that that's carefully depicted as you stated. The other thing, when it comes to the 35,000 square feet, I would say plus or minus 35,000 square feet, because you don't know what the square footage of the lot or the property is going to be, or what the changes are. And I also think it needs to have a caveat where it could be multi-story. And also, in looking at that, I didn't see any retail. Retail does bring in money, and if you're going to be doing 24/7 or thereabouts, or even late hours, you're going to want to have some retail there. That's where the 3P comes into play. And again, I'm glad that we did change the impact fees. In the plan, it should say that it will be reviewed on a regular basis, whatever that regular basis is, so to make sure that we are looking at what the proper impact is for the community. I do also want to say to your staff, you've always done a phenomenal job with little money, little staff, as well as little spaces. And I think that the numbers here show how phenomenal you all are. And please echo those comments to all your staff people from all the board here today, because I think you're seeing a lot of the same comments from every board member. You all do a phenomenal job. And I've heard nothing but compliments from the citizens about our libraries. And it goes to show you, I know at one point we actually cut back the hours, and I remember the outcry from the public. So it goes to show that the public is paying attention, and I believe that there is full support on many levels for the library system and your staff, and it shows, and it's important that people use the libraries, and I know that during the summertime, I've spoken to you that, there's young reading with young families and getting people to read, and what's the best way to teach someone? Teach them to read, and the world is there. It's right there for them in so many different aspects. So congratulate you all, and I'm looking forward to seeing great things from you.
Commissioner Constantine and then Commissioner Herr.
Well, I was also going to say that I'm prepared to make a motion on the recommendations, yes. But I did want to point out that two figures that I think are, significant when talking about this community is almost 62% use this at least once a month, and that nearly 79% are willing to, consider a possible tax increase. I do also feel that, one of the things that we need to look at, because it's starting to come up, is on impact fees, specifically when it comes to the library. I think that's something that we need to look at. And I wanted to compliment also on the innovative programs that we have. I'm hearing nothing but positive things about the language pod we just put in at every station, and so many other things that we do, so congratulations. The one thing I would suggest, even though it's in the future, it's just something I want to point out, because it's so important to protect our past, is that when we're looking at the downtown Sanford Library, we at least try to maintain a little bit of the historic presence that particular building has served and has been there for quite a while, as opposed to just, building this beautiful, modern, new one. That might be good for other places, but maybe in Sanford we need to look at, a more traditional type of location. And if you want me to make the motion, I'll be happy to.
We're going to hear from the rest of the commission.
Yep.
Because everyone's input is important before we make a final decision. Commissioner Herr.
Me? I have an entirely different perspective on this. I absolutely support the libraries. I will approve moving forward with the master plan. The survey was 6,800 responses, and Rick, can you tell us a little bit about that pool?
Yeah, we had a survey that we were asking folks that showed up. We had several public meetings. Those folks participated in the survey while they were there, and were able to give those back. So I think I know where you're going. Those are the folks that clearly, they were passionate enough to show up to a public meeting during the day or in the evening.
Yeah, so we have a survey that says, first of all, the people that are interested in the libraries enough to show up to a public meeting about them, you have a 95% satisfaction rate, which is gigantic. That's better than almost any industry that we have out there today. Maybe Amazon beats you, but I would not put my money on that. And that's with reduced staff, reduced size, all of that good stuff. My perspective is maybe we're better than all these other benchmarks that we used, and maybe 35,000 square foot buildings take us off of what the real mission here is, that you guys, you're mission-based, and that's what's driving the success of the existing operation. And so I look at this very differently in that I'm not sure that I want to invest a ton of money in new buildings that we have to manage and pull away from materials and we've already pulled away from staff. When I start throwing buildings up like that, that's a whole different game changer. So I would just like to flip the paradigm and give more credit to our team and their input about how to do this, as opposed to the consultants that says 35,000 square foot buildings because we have them in California and we have them in South Carolina. I don't think we want to be like everybody else. So that is just not, I love the notion of expanded services. I don't love the notion of expanded expenses that don't actually drive to what we should be doing, which is the end user gaining access to a facility that gives them what they need. And right now you have a satisfaction rate that would indicate that I don't necessarily know that I need to change the paradigm. That's my thought.
And that's why input from everyone on a board is important, because you might hear something that you hadn't contemplated. I will say that as a very rare user of the library system, I'm not in the 95% because I don't use it, and I don't know how many of our citizens, and I know you've got numbers, because we've sat and talked about them, right? Like and Christine is very sure that I know how many tens of thousands of people are there. And the services that libraries are delivering now are so different from what they used to be, right? It used to be you just went in, you checked out a book, and you left. And I think for some of the younger demographic that is in this community, they are using Amazon, and they're doing their, what's the thing? Kindle. And, it's, so what the younger generation, I believe I'm hearing from Christine and her team say that they're using the libraries for is for interactive services, children's story time, community meetings, things that that historically you wouldn't think of as being necessarily just checking a book out on a shelf. So while space doesn't drive that, you need space for kids to congregate and parents to be separate from the other folks who are looking for the adult fiction. There's a balance. And I think, like with everything we've done in Seminole County, a balance is really where we need to strike. So there are things in this master plan working document that I can be 100% on board with, and in concept am completely on board with. I worry that if we vote to accept it as presented, some of the nuances, like Commissioner Delary said, plus or minus 35,000 square feet, and or Winter Springs, Oviedo. How do we make sure that those flexibilities in this master plan get consumed and moved on to the next level, and that we don't just accept this and then, if there's a new board compilation here a few years later going, well, but this is what was accepted, and no one reads the clerk's fabulous detailed minutes that says, well, there was actually flexibility intended there. So how are you going to capture that for us?
So I just rewounded, the presentation to slide 14. The item number 2, and this came up with some of the briefings and some of the discussions that we've had in leading up to today. What does commission a written building program statement mean? It's essentially what you just described. The consultant has laid out their recommendation based on the way they see it, and they're comparing us to both, folks around us as well as nationally. In this case, what we're saying right out of the gate, before we start a capital program, we need to find out what's best for us. So agreed, I agree with everything that's been said. What we're facing right now is we continue to have a new group of users, the younger folks coming in. We have also seen demand for individual space, which we really have never plugged into before. I probably equate it more the lines of, what you might see on a college campus where they have study carrels and those kinds of things. Yeah. And it's not just from the younger generation and the younger users of the library, but also folks who are now working remote, where they need to get out of the house, but they need a place to be able to work and do so quietly away from the house, but away from the office as well. So those demands, those civic demands, as it continues to change, we need to make sure that we're designing a new space that's flexible enough that meets those kinds of needs for us. So that is how we would definitely come back to you before we would ever start building anything and decide what works for us in Seminole County and what does the next generation of building look like.
Okay.
And it may be a combination of all of those things.
Okay, and before I give it to Commissioner Zembauer and then Commissioner Delary, one last thing. When we talk about public-private partnerships, I want to make sure we get on the record that Seminole State College is very excited about partnering in this project on any one of our currently owned pieces of property, both the Oviedo campus and the Sanford Lake Mary campus. There are great opportunities to partner with the college and perhaps even our K-12 system at some point in time. Commissioner Zembauer and then Commissioner Delary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out, and Rick articulated very well, recommendations, it's a working document. My expectation, this is going to evolve. So I will move a motion to accept the master plan as a working document, direct staff to begin work on the near-term actions, direct staff to develop funding strategies for future discussion and consideration with the BCC and all community stakeholders for proposed design and construction of new expanded facilities.
Second.
Motion by Zembauer, second by her. Commissioner Delary?
Thank you. Rick, in our briefing, you actually spoke a lot about a library foundation. You didn't speak about it today.
You're right.
And I wanted to make sure that whoever makes the motion, that that is actually included in that, because you talked about that, and one of my concerns is that it wouldn't be in competition with the Friends of the Library.
Correct.
Can you expand on that, please?
Certainly. The Friends of the Library right now, they absolutely do a fantastic job.
Correct, they do.
There are items that get funded throughout the course of the year that they are literally funding themselves, and it allows us to move quickly on certain things. This is not that. The idea is that they would run parallel with one another. This is really the opportunity to build through a philanthropic line of being able to bring in large donors and large checks, if you will. That's the recommendation coming back from the consultant on this. Clearly, I mean, point well taken. We need to be able to do that. How we do that, where we do that is still up for debate, obviously, but that we need to look at a way to be able to take in and raise large sums of dollars in the philanthropic area.
I want to make sure that the motioner and the seconder agree to include that in the direction moving forward.
I don't.
No, my expectation with my motion was with the BCC and all community stakeholders. If they want to be a stakeholder, we should listen to them as well, and I suspect that's going to happen by default. So I don't know that we need to amend it.
Well, and I addressed in my briefing that I have a little bit of a concern of now we build another 501c3 outside of the Park Foundation. That's going to focus on parks. This is going to focus on libraries. We are building lots of repeat work because there's an underlying infrastructure that would have to be supported in both of those that could be supported by one of them and just branching it and causing it to be different. They could have subcommittees within. The Foundation for Seminole County Public Schools does a phenomenal job of this without duplicating the infrastructure. And quite frankly, I think we get farther that way. So I think that was for future consideration. So I appreciate that the motioner did not have it in there so that there can be further contemplation on that.
Commissioner Constantine?
Thank you. And I'm just assuming that if, as part of the motion, that they recognize that this is a living, breathing document that's going to continue to change and develop and change. Because I mean, and structurally change. Because 35,000 feet may not be the right answer. As I've indicated, Sanford we need to look at it in a little bit a different way because of the historic perspective. So, you know, in approving this, I approve the concept of where we are and what we're doing, not necessarily that this is the final answer to anything.
We've had a motion and a second. We've had discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Durr. All right. Ms. Beach, do we have any members of the public who would like to comment on any of the items from this morning?
We do. We have, I believe it's Nancy Prine, followed by Paul Owens.
Okay. And just as a reminder, the public will have 3 minutes to speak, and if you would give your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Prine. My address is 655 Terrace Boulevard, Orlando, 32803. Though I do not live in Seminole County, I've spent a lot of time here and dedicated a lot of my resources, whatever they might be, to Seminole County. First issue is the issue of Seminole Forever. I think all of us who are here to comment today, maybe one or two don't, agree. We ask that you go forward with that as quickly as you can. And I have one other comment, but I'd like to let you know how many of us in the audience agree. So.
Great.
One other comment. Be sure when you are selecting properties and selecting uses that the compatible use is consistent with what you're trying to do. You may find that a farmer uses herbicides that kill off all the wonderful wildflowers that you have that support the farming and everything else. You might find that a kid's play area distracts from whatever happens next door. I live next door or down the street from the school, and you would think that would be quiet, except when the kids get out and they start screaming, those kids can really scream. Many of them have found their voice, and they want to tell you all about it. So as far as that issue goes, go forward, please, quickly. The rest of the state needs to hear from you. And I meet on a regular basis with people from other states, and I tell them about Florida Forever, and they say, how do you get that done? Seminole County Forever has a wonderful ring to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Prime. Mr. Owens?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, commissioners and staff, and Mr. Malloy. Good to see you again. Been a while. I'm Paul Owens, president of 1,000 Friends of Florida. We're a statewide nonprofit dedicated to fiscally and environmentally sustainable development. We're based in Tallahassee. I live in Orlando. About 3 months ago, I testified before you a second time to urge you to move forward in establishing the Seminole Forever Land Conservation Program in the county's budget. Since then, I've seen some developments in the state capitol that only make the case stronger for Seminole Forever. First, the legislature passed a budget that would spend more than $1 billion on land conservation. Assuming the governor confirmed or approves this part of the budget, it will represent a clear signal that the current leadership in Tallahassee is united behind protecting environmentally sensitive land before it can be developed. Second, the legislature unanimously passed a bill that will dedicate $100 million a year, every year, to the Florida Forever program, and this bill has already been signed by the governor. This new law guarantees that there will be a state funding source every year that can be leveraged by the numerous other local governments with their own land conservation program. So if Seminole fails to keep up with those other local governments, it'll go to the back of the line in competing for state funding. Moreover, this same new state law also prioritizes protection of land within the Florida Wildlife Corridor, as well as property in imminent danger of development, just like the draft Seminole Forever Ordinance does. Both these conditions apply to the Yarborough Ranch property. A local dedicated funding source for land conservation would make Seminole County's current application to protect that property much, much stronger. We've reviewed the latest draft ordinance, and it's in pretty good shape, but we would prefer that the funding go back to 6% of the general fund or the equivalent for a more robust and impactful program. I've said it before, but it's a point worth making again. Seminole County has the opportunity to establish a new paradigm for Florida that acknowledges that protecting land and protecting water is a basic responsibility of local government that belongs in the budget every year. This commitment doesn't have to depend on the willingness of county voters to approve an additional tax on themselves. The discussion of Seminole Forever has been going on for almost a year now, and frankly, it's hard to be patient. Florida continues to absorb about 1,000 new residents a day throughout our state, including here in Seminole County. The longer the wait, the greater the chance of losing more environmentally valuable land forever. So commissioners, let's get this done.
Do we have any more speakers, Ms. Beach?
We do. Next, we have Phyllis Hall, followed by Bill Hyde.
Got one that doesn't need to
So
speak.
just as a reminder, folks, the work session that we had this morning on Seminole Forever was just that, a work session. This will be coming back to us in a form that we will be voting on later, and you will all have opportunity to speak at that time. So if you would like to speak this morning, you are, of course, welcome to, but just want to remind you.
So we have Bill Hyde, followed by Charles Lee, followed by Joe Humphreys.
Mr. Hyde.
And Mr. Lee's gone. Charles is not here anymore.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Bill Hyde, live at 2379 Audley Street in Oviedo. And I appreciate the Chairman's efficiency and the way she's doing this meeting and others, starting at 9 o'clock and so on and so forth, and holding all the comments. I know this is coming back again, but I can't stand here and not get a chance to vote, because we had a vote earlier and everybody raised their hands that was all ready to jump into my pockets and spend my taxes, but I didn't get to vote. So now this is my chance to vote here before you. In 2017, there was an opportunity to do something like this on the Little Econ River. But instead of turning an industrial commercial property into a park, the commission decided to build student housing, allow student housing to be built, because we needed to provide student housing, and the income for the county would have been much greater, of course. And then last year, the commission decided in my neighborhood not to do anything for a park, no great outrage to build a park on a little postage stamp that had some environmental concerns, which, by the way, got wiped out with a stroke of a pen. But the commission decided that we needed some moderate income housing, little 70-foot lots, and we needed the revenue. So then we come to the elephant in the room, the Yarborough property. It's already permitted for 300 houses, $3,000, $4,000 a year in property taxes. We're talking $1 billion. But the commission decided, no, we're not going to do that. Instead, not only do we want to create this giant fund to buy the property, we're going to take it off the tax rolls. Every time you guys take a golf course or a developer's property off tax rolls, you increase the pressure, if not the moment, to raise our taxes. It takes money to run the county, and we understand that. But when you take property off the tax roll and then make me pay for it, I got a problem with that. It's just not, it's not fair to the taxpayer. I know that's not a popular thing to say in this room today, but I've never been shy about, going against the grain around here. So I hope before you go forward too much with this, you put a lot more thought into it. One objection that I really have, because I did read all that, is the number of members of this council that don't even have to be Seminole County residents. Well, at least put nothing but Seminole County residents and hopefully taxpayers who actually are going to foot the bill for this. There is no tooth fairy. It's going to cost money, and it comes from the taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde.
Joe Humphreys, followed by Mac Hafford and Gabrielle Milch.
Okay.
Good morning. Joe Humphreys, 883 Cardinal Point Cove, Sanford, Florida. I think you know that I'm supportive of the Seminole Forever. I want to echo Commissioner Zembauer's comments about hunters and fishermen. As a member of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, I can tell you for a fact that everything he stated is correct and then some. That's the history of this county. Now, we know, given where we are now, given how much urbanization has taken place, trying to do that becomes a very, very big challenge. However, there are, again, funds available nationally. Adam Putnam, our former Ag Commissioner and former candidate for governor, now runs Ducks Unlimited in Memphis. I've reached out to him, I haven't talked to him, but again, Ducks Unlimited spends millions of dollars on an annual basis preserving wetlands, which I think we have a couple of in this county. So there are lots of opportunities here. We talk about urban sprawl. I went back in 2014, former Commissioner Horan talked about, let's take care of the west and the east rural areas of the county. Let's concentrate our development in the core of the county. If you look again at the agreements going all the way back to the DCA agreements of 1999, That was a commitment that this county made, both to the state and to the citizens of this county. We know for a fact, it's proven, documented, that urban sprawl does not pay for itself. Ask Megan Sladig. They hired a great organization of North Carolina that's documented that. So again, at the end of the day, we have an opportunity here. It's a commitment of this county, has been, and a lot of people moved here because of it. So thank you. Support this.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Mark Pafford. I actually live in Maitland, Florida. The address is there. And by the introduction, I need to improve my handwriting. It's Mark instead of Mac, but that's okay. My last time making public comment was in 2016 from the House floor in Tallahassee. By the looks of me in a beard and no jacket, I've really enjoyed my time outside of such a corrosive nightmare that is Tallahassee. I lost hope in Tallahassee that anything good could come from that body based on what I was seeing. And it applied to most members of the legislature. It didn't matter what party they were. Good things are hard to come by up there. My experience in Tallahassee led me to serve on all of the agricultural and natural resource committees over 8 years. And it was very frustrating. And by the time the 8 years were up in 2016, I had lost hope. And that explains why I've been quiet until this morning. Florida Forever is, you know, I'm sure, whether it's $1 billion or $10 billion, it's not going to have adequate funding to begin to do what's necessary in Florida. There's so much acquisition that is required just for corridors, let alone water as a resource, and the quality of the water that we have and the lands that are required to have that quality. That said, I'm here because I have hope. You all have provided an opportunity for me to do something other than go to work today. I've decided to take personal time, which I hate doing, and be here to ask that you continue to do your diligence. I'm the current president of Friends of the Wekiva River, and it is important that you all continue to do what you're doing, get to a conclusion, and try to get this thing made into a reality. And that's all I had this morning, so thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
We have Ms. Milch. She filled out forms to speak on items 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. Do the best you can, Gabby.
Don't call me Gabby for nothing. Okay. And it is good to integrate. Hi, my name is Gabby Milch, Gabrielle Milch, and I live at 252 Coble Drive, Longwood, Florida. I'm in District 3, and I'm a longtime resident of Seminole County. I have 3 kids that grew up in Seminole County, and I truly love Seminole County. And I think that the Seminole Forever program is a breath of fresh air for me, and I love the fact, that we're all going to try to leverage this money to do things in a better budgetary fashion. I'm sad that it's only 5% match to put up for some of these properties, because I think it's just adequate with minimum standards. I'm sorry. And when I say that, I mean that about our water quality and our water quantity issues we have in Central Florida with saltwater intrusion potential, with water quality issues from our nutrient pollution, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, all those things that we do with our high-impact development. I'm also excited about, soil building and partnerships and being a member of the Soil and Water Conservation District. Supervisor number 4, I was also contacted the NRCS, and they potentially have some partnerships and things that they can help us within the county and help the agricultural community and, you know, get our producers to produce our food locally and to keep our soils and our adjacent property owners. The integration of invasive species, you know, maybe if you want to have a hunt out there, Chairman Zembauer, maybe you could just get some hogs and kind of round them up, because I know that they can be a nuisance species on some of those natural lands.
Absolutely. I was going to ask my fellow
Yeah.
commissioners, what do y'all want to do about those feral swine?
Yeah, knock them out, whatever. But I'm sorry if there's anyone out there who care about the feral hogs, I apologize. But, okay, also, you know, with the Wekiva Basin study, I did go to the meeting, and I was like, what's all that red on those charts there? Because there is a lot of potential for flooding. We've developed out in strange ways. You know, it doesn't always, the math doesn't always work, because maybe, you know, somebody plugged a culvert that we didn't know about, or it just happened. And I live in the Wekiva Basin, and my utility, Utilities Inc. or Sunshine Utilities, you know, they discharge raw sewage still into the Wekiva River, and there's not a lot of hope, and I'm talking with them and trying to integrate that. So, you know, flooding and not allowing people to build homes in the floodplain, even if it's 2 feet above, you know, the base flood elevation, that still doesn't mean that you could lose your whole life in a flood. I was just recently over in Fort Myers area, and I looked at the devastation of those homes on the beaches, and it was horrendous. Those people lost everything. They're living out of trailers. They have terrible, you know, things that are happening to them. And I know I ran out of time, but I did combine my three topics.
Hit libraries.
Well, libraries, you know, you guys all talk about these public-private partnerships, and I like to say that public-private. But the public-private partnership, well, Heathrow is your perfect experimental area, because, you know, Heathrow, if the benevolent folks who live in those communities want to, you know, donate to the foundation and get all that, you know, money together, we'll put a store over there, you know, do something over there. But I think if you look at Sanford and the difference between Sanford and Heathrow, you look at the difference between Winter Springs and Oviedo. Winter Springs would need a library, you know, in some respects. So that's my opinion, and I'm thankful that you're not privatizing the libraries, because I think that would be more expensive in the long run. And if you keep tabs on your public-private partnership in Heathrow area, maybe you can, you know, do some balancing of how much you have to spend on building a library versus how much you have to spend on getting people to learn how to read and be educated and learn about things. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Melch.
Next, we have Tom Holler, followed by Cindy Holler, and our last speaker on this item is Jay Exum.
Okay, great. Ms. Holler, if you want to come on down, and Mr. Exum, I'll ask you to go ahead
Tom
and...
Heller, 1731 Beacon Drive, Sanford. My wife was going to pass out an article from 1,000, what is this? 1,000 Friends of Florida. Give it to the Florida. So I won't reiterate everything that's in this article. What I'll do is just emphasize that time is of the essence. We got to get this done before all the lands are paved over. As far as tax revenue on these properties, we take property that could be built out and turn it into a park. If every study done on this subject, I mean, Joe pointed this out earlier, every study done on this subject shows that when you put in a subdivision, the increase in tax revenue from that subdivision in an absolute best case will cover their own infrastructure costs. In an average case, it falls short, and the rest of the taxpayers end up picking up the difference. So as far as tax revenue on a park or a piece of preserved land, I don't think the bears need schools to go to. I don't think the deer drive cars. We don't need roads for them. I don't think the coyotes go to public libraries. We don't need libraries for the coyotes and the bobcats. So the infrastructure cost is almost nothing. As far as the maintenance cost, I hear a lot of talk about the maintenance cost, and then we want to have some clarity to that. My wife and I own 2 private conservation properties, and I got to tell you from experience, the more natural you keep a piece of property, the lower your maintenance costs are going to be. And then as far as the economic benefits, people moved here and are willing to pay the higher taxes because Florida, this is Florida's natural choice. They want to have this natural stuff. It increases our quality of life. I don't know how you can put a number on that, but it's something, it's why we're all here. And that's pretty much it. I think, like we've talked about many times, we've got to live up to our motto, where Florida's a natural choice. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holler. Mrs. Holler?
Hi, excuse me. Cindy Holler, 1731 Sanford. And I'm not actually speaking on Seminole Forever. I'm in support of it. More money to that program, the better. So I wanted to speak on the Wekiva Watershed Management Plan, and I know you already voted to pass it, so I just kind of wanted to, just a couple of little things. Many flood-prone areas are not currently mapped. I think they need to get mapped.
And that's what we voted to do, Mrs. Holler.
Right, yeah. So good to prioritize, and then also the little Wekiva restoration is, very important to do. So that's it.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Exum, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jay Exum, 2253 Peachleaf Court, Longwood, Florida. I'm here in part because Charles Lee asked me to tell you that he had a hard stop at 11 o'clock, and he reminded me 3 times that he wanted me to say, Audubon of Florida, support Seminole Forever. We talked a little bit about our issues. First of all, we'd like to thank you for the changes, or probably staff, in the revisions that have been made to the draft ordinance. It's a much more cogent document, so thank you for that. And we would also like you to consider returning to the 6% level of funding. But otherwise, we appreciate what seems to be fairly unanimous support of the initiative. So thank you for that from both of us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. We are going to take recess and take a 10-minute break and come back and tackle. Yes, Mr. Commissioner Constantine.
Just very quickly before we finish this thing, I don't think we took a vote on Seminole Forever. Do we have to make it move forward?
Nope.
No.
I just wanted to make sure. And the only other thing I wanted to say is there was a comment here about, how we take these lands and then it costs us. Just to give you an example, every study says that if you protect land, the land around it becomes more valuable. I'll give you one example from us. We bought Rolling Hills Country Club just 5 years ago. The value, and I know that our county manager knows this, the value of that property has increased in those 5 years 75% around the open land. That's all I wanted to say.
All right. We will recess for 10 minutes. We'll be back at 11:50. Thank you. will join us momentarily since we have a quorum. I'm going to go ahead and reconvene the meeting, and we are moving on to our consent agenda. For the record, I'm going to read the public participation requirements for the consent agenda. Pursuant to Florida law, the public has a right to be heard on all propositions except when the Board of County Commissioners is acting on ministerial or emergency matters or conducting a meeting exempt from Section 286.011 Florida statutes. Public comment time on propositions shall be 3 minutes for individuals and 6 minutes for group representatives. The right to be heard during quasi-judicial hearings is governed by Florida law. The public will be provided the opportunity to be heard on non-agenda items at the end of the meeting, which is at the end of our 1:30 meeting. Proper decorum will be observed. In accordance with the operating policies and procedures of the Seminole County Board of County Commissioners, Section 2.175, Public Participation Before the Board, comments shall be limited to the subject being considered by the board. All public comments shall avoid personal attacks, abusive language, and redundancy. Disrespectful, rude, irrelevant, or slanderous remarks or disruptive behavior may subject the individual to removal from the board chambers. The chairman may curtail repetitious comments. County Manager, do we have any modifications to the agenda?
I just have one typo error that I would just like to correct for the record. It's item number 14. It's the bar number, the budget amendment request. In the agenda, it's listed as 23042, and it should be 23-043. So just want to correct that for the record.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, Commissioners, we have consent agenda items number 4 through 19.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Move approval of items 4 through 20 and 21.
Okay.
Second, with the corrections of 14.
All right. And are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any of those matters?
I do have a speaker for item 11.
Okay.
Reginald Campbell.
Sir, I'm sorry. Mr. Campbell, please go ahead and take the podium. There's a gentleman, Ms. Beach, sitting behind you who appears to also believe that he has filled out a form. Maybe you can help him with whatever that is. And
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Campbell, we'll go ahead and take your comments if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Reginald Campbell with the Bookertown Improvement Association. We're located at 4631 Gilbert Street, Sanford, Florida. And I spoke to Mr. Gray earlier, and he informed me that this parcel 157, also Mr. Dredge, didn't involve the retention ponds that I was concerned with. So I just wanted to get on record and say that, and we'll meet and discuss the retention pond issue at a later date. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
We appreciate you, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more speaker.
Yeah, real quick, Gray Wilson, 5044 Shoreline Circle, Sanford, Florida.
What item are you speaking on, Mr.
11.
Wilson? Okay.
Item 11. I believe that I have a neighbor, we live in Lake Forest, very near this wonderful community, Bookertown, and we're quite concerned about this, anything that's going on there that's taking even bits and pieces of that neighborhood. We've taken away the trees on one side. The I-4 has been widened, and as Reginald has expressed his concern on other issues that are coming up in the retention pond, that all the development that's happened along Orange has now somehow ended up going to be a problem down there. So I hope that this board continues to engage with the community and look for another way on some of these other issues. I don't think a single piece of this property in Bookertown should be touched at all. And they've been involved for a long time. And so I hope you take that into consideration, continue working with them, and protect that historic community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Commissioner Herr?
Yes, I'm going to ask the county manager to address this because the second commentary didn't indicate the reality of what it is that we're voting on. So if you would, Mr. Gray, please address
Thank you, Commissioner. And actually, as the Commissioner's direction for me and the Commission a month ago, when Bookertown Improvement, or the community came to discuss their concerns with, regarding the retention ponds, as you know, with the Orange Boulevard improvement project that's going on. Commissioner Herr asked us to attend the community meeting, and which we did, and we brought our staff to explain that project. Mr. Campbell was present. And what we committed to them and what we are continuing to do then, and actually had subsequent meetings after the community meeting with Mr. Campbell and the community, is to re-look at the placement of those ponds that are required in that project. Our new assistant county manager is back here. Kristen Swenson is looking at that as we speak, and we're going to be getting with Commissioner Herr to brief and update her, as well as Mr. Campbell and the community, on those to ensure that those are the right placement of those ponds, or if not, maybe there's a chance that we can look at those further. So we're continuing to do that now. We have another community meeting coming up next Monday, I believe June 19th, where we're actually bringing the engineer consultant that was on this project to the community meeting to update the community as well, as we report back on the placement of how those ponds were placed. So we're in that process, and we will be coming back to the board to update the board.
And for clarification purposes, item number 11 doesn't involve.
Yes, thank you.
Does not involve a retention pond.
Right.
Yes, thank you. That was just part of the right-of-way for Orange Boulevard. I'll get the names right on these roads soon.
There's a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Any other discussion?
Just a comment. Just a note, the online agenda and the printed agenda calls for consent item agendas 4 through 19. It's actually 4 through 20 plus the constitutionals. My motion was 4 through 20 and 21 constitutionals. The seconder, I think, agreed to that.
Okay, thank you very much. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right. Is there anything else this morning that we would like to address? Staff, do you have another briefing?
I have one briefing. We can actually do it this afternoon if you would like, but it's Wheelie Acres. It'd be really quick. I can have Ms. Rebecca Hammett come up, and it was a potential future agenda item that you all had us explore, and she can give us an update really quick.
I'm sure that Ms. Hammett can do it very quickly. I'm not sure if we are capable of giving you feedback very quickly.
Can we do it this afternoon?
We can. It's
Yep.
actually scheduled for this afternoon, so I just was going to move it up if you wanted to. Okay.
That sounds great. We'll do that this afternoon. And then, County Attorney, anything for this morning?
No reports at this time.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we will stand in recess until 1:30.
Plan.